everyone. Thanks for coming. My name is Sahar, and I'm an impact and engagement strategist. And I realize that not a lot of people know what that is through conversations I've had, even just today. And that is I'm essentially someone that you would call to, if you created a documentary or a film about a social issue or problem, I'm who you would call to help map out the terrain and a campaign plan for how to put that story and that film to use in service of the movement that it's a part of. And that can look a whole lot of different ways, but that's essentially what I do. I'm currently in the, when David asked me to do this presentation, I was trying to think about what would be most useful as a conversation to have together. And in the last, I would say, 3 or 4 years, I'm noticing a real increase in the amount of organizations, whether they're local, national NGOs, international NGOs, nationally networked groups, even funders, that are interested in using story to advance their work. And when I started working at Active Voice, which is a nonprofit that I worked at for 7 years, that are leaders in using film to advance social change, back then when I started working there, and I would do phone calls with organizations about using film to advance their work, the conversation was always trying to get them to see the possibilities. I don't have that problem anymore in 2017. Now everyone is eager to use film. But the landscape has changed so much, and because there are so many people who are invested in wanting to use film, I'm noticing that's leading to a lot of confusion and challenges in what those relationships and partnerships can look like. So that's kind of the conversation I wanted to have today. Let's see. So I guess one of the reasons why I think filmmakers are using film more frequently than they were before is because they're also seeing these organizations as valuable allies in a variety of different ways. One, they can be experts provide expertise on the issues that their films are about. They can provide access, distribution. They can be distribution partners and provide access to really valuable audiences that you want to get your film in front of. They can also be really valuable in terms of introducing you to different film subjects that you might feature in your film. So that's one of the reasons why filmmakers are really interested. Advocates are also pretty interested in using film because it really helps to illustrate the issues that they're working on, and also why the work that they're doing is so important to advance and address some of those problems and issues. I hope you're reading all this as quickly as I'm going through it. Okay, so when David invited me, I was thinking about all these different challenges and reached out to my former boss and now friend and sometimes collaborator, Ellen Schneider, who I know has been doing a ton of research. She works at the Active Voice Lab and is the founder of the Active Voice Lab. She's been doing a lot of research into these tricky relationships and dynamics that can emerge when partnerships are forming around a film. And I've been getting cocktails with her for years now, crying over whiskey about like a partner situation that has gone amok or whatever. And she's been like writing notes and really excited about those stories because she's trying to understand what is leading to some of these hiccups and challenges. And she's also been trying to create a framework for how to support healthy conversations that can lead to really effective and successful partnerships. So I wanted to run through a series of quotes that are going to be really familiar to you. Right? We've all heard something like this before. So these are all quotes that she's heard different people in her research, different stakeholders say. No, but we should, there's an email that we're going to be passing around. You should send a recommendation that you do that. This is real, Oh, I'm going a little fast? No, I'm sorry. I've read these a million times. Right? So Ellen and the lab have culled a lot of those reflections and lessons from the whole ecosystem of stakeholders that are involved in creating a film or working with a film or distributing a film. And this model that the ecosystem of change model is one that the lab uses to illustrate where a film might fit into a movement and all the different folks that might have a stake in using it. This new tool that Ellen has and the lab has been creating is based off of something called the prenups, what funders and creatives should talk about before tying the knot. How many people have heard of this or have used it in their work already? Yeah, it's an extremely useful resource. In fact, I was in the mission one day I ran into a friend of mine who's a filmmaker, and we were just chatting on the street randomly, and he had, right in that conversation, realized that I worked at Active Voice. This is like 7 years ago. And he was like, oh my God, and he reached into his bag and he pulled out the prenups, which he had printed out, and he was carrying with him in his briefcase, which I thought was really funny. But anyway, it was a MacArthur-funded project that really helps to talk about the awkward but really necessary conversations that need to happen between filmmakers and funders, all the things to be thinking about and how to navigate through them. So now Ellen is working on expanding that to include all kinds of different stakeholders and partners on a project, so not just funders, but everyone. And so we're going to be, today I'm going to be drawing on the research that the lab has been doing into this to create a framework for us to really talk about some of those challenging and awkward moments in relationship building around a film. It's organized into 4 types of conversations that should be happening around a film. Let me get to that card. One, the first thing that you want to be talking about is the mission or the motive of entering into that partnership, right? So why do these collection of people need to come together? What are the values that they are bringing into that conversation? What are they trying to accomplish from their respective positions? Once you've had these conversations and responded to these questions, if there's alignment, if there's synergy, or at least enough complementarity between those missions and motives for getting involved, only then might you enter into a conversation about method, which is the next type of conversation that is important to have. And that's essentially like, what are the activities that are a part of this conversation? How are we going to work together? How are we going to make decisions about different aspects of our work together in our collaboration? Who's going to be responsible for which aspects of this work together? What's the role going to look like? All of the things that go into how you do what you do. That's the next, really just kind of thinking through what are all the aspects of that. The next thing, which no one ever wants to talk about, and is perhaps the most difficult conversation, is the conversation about money. And I think the reason that that's challenging, as everyone in this room knows, is because making films is emotional, it's personal. Activists often are feeling the same way. The work that they do is really emotional and really personal. And so when it comes to talking about money, that can be really challenging and tricky and hard. And so whereas you might have really nuanced and detailed conversations about your mission and your values, and about the method and all the architecture of the work that you're going to do together, you might not get as specific and grounded and particular about the money conversation. And that's really important. And there are a lot of aspects of things to be considering in that conversation, such as who holds the rights to a film, and what investor models are we using? How is the film going to get reimbursed? Filmmaker going to get reimbursed for their work? All of those things need to be a part of the conversation. And finally, mobility, which is essentially just to say that filmmaking, it's not like your traditional communications work where you have a map or a script and it's straight and set and that's it. Oftentimes the story might shift and change with different dynamics that are coming and going. The landscape might shift pretty dramatically. I was just saying earlier that when I was working on a campaign last year, just before the elections, we had this beautiful plan for what we were going to do. And then the unexpected happened. We actually didn't believe that Trump was going to get elected, but that shifted everything for us. And suddenly, all of our partners were in a totally different mode and focused on completely different things than they'd mapped out for their year ahead. And that caused huge delays on our timeline. Some partners dropping out because it was no longer, the film subject was no longer part of one of their priorities. New stakeholders came in, but then now we're at the beginning of the partnership cultivation process, and that takes a lot of time to get the trust built and all of that. So the mobility conversation is one, you can't plan for everything, and it's not even helpful to be super exhaustive about it, but to acknowledge that things might change and to maybe consider what things might change ahead of time is at least a useful bookmark for a conversation to kind of get started. So that's what the mobility framework is for. So I am not going to be talking at you this whole time. We've devised a really cool, and I hope it's cool, framework for this conversation. We're going to basically role play 3 different scenarios. These scenarios will sound familiar to you. We've made up films, so any films that you hear up here that sound like yours or sound like ones that you know of, it's completely coincidental. Any mention of a partner or a funder or a person that you hear, again, completely made up. None of this is real. These are kind of scripted. None of us are actors, so be really nice to us. We're going to be probably reading a lot of it. And I have I've planted some filmmakers in the audience that don't have a ton of prep, but they do have a little bit of prep. They've read the script ahead of time, so they're going to come up, and for each scenario, we'll have a new filmmaker. And we'll read it, and then I really want this to be, I like that this room is as intimate as it is, because I do want this to feel like a conversation, a community conversation. Everyone in this room is an expert on awkward conversations. We've all been in them. We've all felt uncomfortable. We've all not known how to say a certain thing. So I really hope that you will help make and enliven this conversation by bringing your own experiences and your expertise to this conversation, because there's someone else in this room that's been there also. We've invited 2 stellar guests to help with this conversation. Don Young is Director of Programs for the Center for Asian American Media. I'm sure many of you know him. He oversees programming in public media, from funding to production to the broadcast, basically from soup to nuts, all aspects of a film. From that perspective, he really brings a wealth of experience and knowledge working with the entire ecosystem of players involved in making a film production happen and making a film campaign happen. So we're really excited to have him here. Thank you, Don, for being here. And Christine Platt-Dewey is the Managing Director of International Films at Roku. And Roku, if you don't know already, I assume most of you know, it has 13 Oscar-nominated titles to its fame. Christine runs the international division, but also helped to found the productions division and the educational division. And the reason I mention that is because Christine also brings a bird's eye view of various different aspects of the distribution landscape. But in particular, we're really lucky to have Christine because she's a real ally to filmmakers, and that's not always common. It's difficult to be an ally to filmmakers in a landscape where films are shifting, or production and distribution is shifting and changing so much, and there are market consequences for those changes. So to have someone here that has that insight and that perspective is really awesome. So thank you, Christine, for being here. I also want to acknowledge that not only is it brave to be up here and speaking and acting when you're not an actor, but I'm also asking them to play roles of people and like to basically represent a perspective that they might not necessarily believe in. So when you ask questions of them, if you could indicate if you'd like them to respond as the person that they're playing, or if you want them to respond as themselves, because that would be really helpful in terms of the conversation that we're having. So that, can you still hear me if I walk away? Yeah. So that I'm not the only one that's talking, I wanted to ask 2 questions to each of you before we dig in. Don, how much acting have you done?
0 as of today.
As of today. And in the interest of the 4 M's, mission, method, money, and mobility, what is your mission or motive for having accepted my invitation to join this conversation?
I think mobility. Whenever we work with Ellen in Active Voice, I'm always very sort of inspired of how she's trying to think of models. She always is pointed about how to create models for a healthy, effective, futuristic ecosystem. So candidly, there was a moment I wasn't sure I'd be right for this when the performative aspect was raised. But then as we have sort of prepared for today's presentation, it's really got me thinking about where this all is at this point in time. And it's, for those of you who are new as filmmakers, it's a crazy time. And I think there isn't enough time and space to really take a step back and think strategically of how you can sort of, everybody's just run on how to benefit their project, but I think framing and knowing where people are coming from at the moment it's super valuable.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, Don. And Christine, same question, how much acting experience do you have?
I think the last experience was 2nd grade in the library and in a school play, so none, basically.
And what is your mission or motive for accepting my offer?
My mission actually was I felt like this would be an opportunity for me to learn as well. I mean, we've been through our conversations at ROCO around various projects that have gone awry for various reasons, and we think this conversation is really important because, as Don is saying, the market is changing so dramatically. And one of the implications of the market changes is the way rights are being treated is very different. So now all of a sudden we have this situation where we used to look at rights only in the international market as an international distributor. And now Netflix and all the digital platforms have come on board, and they are making us all take a second look and say, with films that we're partnering with, we really have to be involved earlier in the conversations, which means we might be working with both the filmmaker and the funder may still be involved in conversations. So it's becoming more important to us. So I expect to get a lot of information for myself out of this too.
Great. Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to invite up our first filmmaker guest who's going to role play with us. And her name is Pallavi Samusetti. And then that mic is for you. Yeah. Thanks, Pallavi. Pallavi is a graduate from UC Berkeley School of Journalism. She graduated a couple years ago, actually a year ago. Is that right? And her final thesis project is currently running its film festival rounds. It's called Escaping Agra. Will you tell us real quickly what the film's about?
Sure. It's about a transgender Indian American who was taken to India under false pretenses and held hostage by their parents after the parents discovered their gender and sexual orientation and their escape and journey back home to California.
Thank you. Very exciting. So I'm going to read you the made-up story, the film that we're going to be workshopping, and a couple of distribution milestones. And then we'll each identify the role that we're playing, and we'll run through the script. So the filmmaker who made this story read a report about a community near her that is a food desert with a high number of malnourished newborns and children. She's shocked, so she reaches out to Food First, which is a nonprofit that's focused on food justice, so she can learn more. Through them, she meets members of the community who are grappling with this issue, including one very active community leader. And through the course of filming, a developer swoops into the community with plans to build a new condominium complex with a grocery store and more. And she has 4 months before she's evicted. Then, in an ironic twist, she herself becomes pregnant. Finally, her community will have access to healthy foods, but she's going to be pushed out and she won't see the benefits. Now she and the community must decide how, whether, and with what forces they can fight to stay in their homes. From food desert to developer's paradise, the film tells the story of the birth of a child and a resistance movement. So she's been working on serialized webisodes on gentrification, and she's got a 1-hour cut that she's using for events. And she'll be doing community screenings, a limited theatrical with Tug, and she's considering self-distributing if Netflix won't accept her film. So, Pallavi, will you read the filmmaker realities?
Sure. I am a recent film school graduate, which I am. I have a pretty great, though short, history of verite, short form, and topical work. I am pretty comfortable with experimentation and welcome all kinds of ideas for innovative new ways to get my work out there. Generally speaking, my projects so far have all focused to one degree or another on social issues. I'm kind of new to the business, but my work has been getting good attention of late, and I have been shooting on my own dime for a year now, but I just got a grant for $25K from a foundation that focuses on malnutrition and food justice issues. Did you know me before? Most of that is true.
And I didn't actually know Pallavi before this morning. Okay, Don, will you read the funder realities?
Sure. I work at a foundation with a very focused food access and security portfolio. I haven't funded media like this before, and I took a risk on funding the project, but I love documentaries and I keep hearing about film impact. I saw Food Inc. and thought it was great. And I kind of promised my director that we might have similar success by funding this project. That was smart, yeah. The funder's beloved, right? So Food First is one of my grantees that the filmmaker interviewed.
I'm going to read the Food First partner realities. I'm the film's strategist and have been working closely with the film's campaign partners. Food First is one of them, and they've been involved for a while now. They were happy to get pulled into this project and eager to use the film to highlight food insecurity issues that they were seeing in the community. They have contributed quite a bit of time and a little bit of their own funding to the project. They introduced the filmmaker to their contacts and allies in the area also. They see this as a fundraising and membership building opportunity. Christine, can you read the distributor realities?
Sure. I'm a boutique distributor that curates a small collection of documentaries to sell to the North American educational market and the international markets. I'm careful in selecting films that we think our buyer contacts will respond to. We're always under pressure to make sure we select films that we know will perform. We signed on early to distribute this film for both educational and international divisions, so we're making a big investment. We're successful in representing the North American educational rights to Christy Jacobson's film, A Place at the Table, and developed a database of contacts that are interested in food security. So we think it's a good fit. On the international side, we're aware that Food Inc. did well internationally. We had success distributing Deborah Coons Garcia's film, Future of Food, so we also feel like we have the relationships in place to do well by the film. When we evaluate a film for our international division, we're always asking ourselves the question, would a commissioning editor program a similar story that takes place locally in their native language? And that's often the hurdle we're faced with when we go to pitch them a documentary. For educational distribution in North America, we want a 6-month window where the film won't be available for purchase, so we can push community groups, libraries, and educational institutions to buy the premium-priced educational license with public performance rights. If the film becomes available for streaming before that, we see a drop-off in sales.
Great. Okay, Pallavi, why don't you guys ready for this? Are you excited? All right, so you can launch us up.
Okay. Thanks, everyone, for taking my call. I just wanted to update you on where I'm at with the film. So the story is so incredible. What's happening? Terrible, but really relevant.
Okay.
And as you saw in the cut I sent you, my character, Olivia, the food justice activist, is getting evicted. So the plot is shifting a little bit. A developer is moving into the community and will be evicting many over the next few months, including my film's protagonist. And the good news is that I've been talking to Casa Justa, and they think this film is really going to help with the community's effort to resist the evictions.
That's interesting. And we really appreciate your update. And it sounds like you have a strong story that will be helpful to this group. But I have to be honest, I'm concerned. The story you just told me isn't actually in the proposal you submitted. So how is it going to help my organization advance our portfolio? As you know, we don't focus on evictions. I need that food desert theme to go back in. And then, in addition, so we just finished this big strategic planning process of which we're funding your film because of that. And what you're telling us is very different. So how will it be possible for you to do the film you want to make and the film that you submitted to us?
Well, Dawn, the food justice issues are certainly still in there. It's just not the main or the only focus. But first, let me just tell you about the great relationship I'm forming with Casa Justa. We're planning a robust partnership in the community. We've got dozens of sneak preview screenings across the country to build buzz around the campaign, and free digital streaming locally to get people to show up at a resistance event.
Oh, wait a minute. Wait. Whoa. You want to do what? Hold up. If you go forward with streaming the film for free, that will cannibalize our sales for public performance rights in North America. And you open the door for someone to pirate a copy, which could jeopardize not only our educational sales in North America, but also our international sales as well.
Oh, well, maybe, I'm sure we can work something out. This is going to be so big.
Actually, I'm concerned it won't be internationally. Food justice is a current issue that has global relevance, but if you go with this more personal story and shift the emphasis from being a story about food insecurity to being a story about gentrification, it will be perceived as a more local American story. You'll be giving up some of your opportunities with international broadcasters who will prefer to program a story about a character from their own community. In Europe right now, the housing shortage caused by the refugee crisis is more relevant to their audience than a story about gentrification in America. And I'm sorry, but that's just the reality of what we're facing right now.
So I have an idea that hopefully will help this out. Why don't we meet with the grantee Food First and get their opinion on what they'd like to see change with the cut? And then you might want to interview their executive director, because that could give you more direction in terms of ensuring that the story gets told well. And then they can probably help you integrate all the themes that you suggested in the proposal in a more robust way. So then I think they could probably help you shape the cut and get it closer to where it needs to be.
Well, I spoke with them. We sent over the latest cut, and they're kind of put off, actually. They put in a lot of time and effort. The film is kind of, a lot of money, and a lot of the characters have to do with their organization, but this cut doesn't really have to do. But like the themes that they care about are so not in there that they're not really sure about using the film anymore. But maybe we can have them make a shorter version. You can make a shorter version that's just about the food themes, and they can use that. How's that?
I think that's a great idea. You can use our funds to create the shorter film and do engagement around that. And then if you could make sure it could go viral, that would be great.
Oh, viral? Hold up. I don't know about going viral. If you're going to do that shorter piece, you definitely need to have that hour cut for the international markets, because the market for shorts, there is really no market for shorts internationally. Sorry.
Pallavi, you're a natural. How much film or acting experience do you have?
Just like very, very, very little.
10 minutes?
In a classmate's
student
film.
Awesome. All right, so wow, a situation where it crashes and burns. Don, where do you think the funder was coming from in this scenario?
So the funder clearly had an agenda of wanting to fund a piece that would explicitly advance their mission, right? Be a tool that they are not in. I guess maybe stepping back, they're not interested in the story the filmmaker wants to tell. They're interested in supporting a tool that will help them advance their mission and their organizational mission.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And where in the mission method, can we go back to my slides real quick? Where in this chain do you feel like that having had that conversation would have been helpful?
The moment the story was going to change.
Yeah.
It's always good practice, just particularly with key funders, to always to have an ongoing relationship with them and be updating them, good or bad.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Nobody likes to be surprised with a project that they didn't believe they were going to fund.
Yeah. And Christine, what would the distributor be most concerned about in this scenario? Like, what was your distributor concerned about?
My distributor was most concerned about the issue of free screenings and free streamings and not being involved in that conversation. We've certainly worked with films where that's been able to happen, so it's not that we would come to the table saying no. We would just need to be part of the conversation around what that would look like so that we could strategize together around making sure that doesn't cannibalize other opportunities that we see for the film. Mm-hmm. And we really see that as a back and forth conversation. I mean, I'm not a hard ass personality, but I was trying to come across as more of a hard ass in this scenario. But I think, I think that what I was saying was absolutely right. Those are the market realities we're dealing with. But the reality that we see is a lot of these films, you can do these different pieces if, as Dawn is saying, you're having the conversation at the right time. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And we're involved in that conversation because we view ourselves as a resource based on our experience with other films, and we've seen other partnerships work for different films. And we feel like we have something to offer in that conversation just based on our own experience. Not that we have all the answers. We certainly don't. Sure. We make a lot of mistakes along the way, and so we've learned a lot from that experience too. So it's just, just about being engaged.
Sure. And Pallavi, did this scenario seem realistic to you? And what jumped out for you in this situation?
I mean, I think maybe there's a little bit of naivete with the filmmaker, like where the filmmaker is coming from, but I feel empathy for the filmmaker in this situation.
Yeah, sure.
Because stories evolve, like it's not just, people aren't play acting, and these things are really happening, and they're important issues, and if she's there with her camera, and it's happening to her protagonist, like she should be filming that. She definitely should have gotten in contact before presenting a rough cut with a completely different theme. She should have been connected to the other players. But it just feels like to not film that is, I feel like that's like Pete Nix in The Force, like doing his doc and then not covering the prostitution scandal. Like he was there, it was happening, it was important. He had to include it into the story. So it just feels kind of like that to me.
Absolutely. I wanted to open it up quickly to you all. Yeah, just questions and things that struck you.
Hold on, we're going to have you use the mic so everybody can hear. Thank you so much.
I have sort of an awkward question, really, for the filmmaker. So where does the filmmaker decide that if there's funding, then they're making a project that's suitable for the funding? And where do they make the decision, I'm a filmmaker, I'm going to do whatever I want? And where is that balance? Because when you first read out the scenario, I just thought, but that's not the right film, right film, you know, so.
Well, so I would always argue, even as a funder or distributor, the filmmaker should always make the film they're trying to make, right? Like, it's impossible to make a film and put your heart and soul behind something you're not engaged in. But I think conversely, and I would sort of, I think we've been moving from funders to investors. When you view it as people, entities that are investing in your project, they have a stake in it. So I think it's not so much what you're doing is counter necessarily, but I think really building that relationship where they understand that you're not pivoting away from their investment, right? Because often filmmakers will just use story as the reason by which people should sort of all of a sudden circle back. And these are relationships that you've established, and when they invest in you, it's a two-way relationship. So you just want to take into account how this might affect how they view your project.
There is one question in the back there.
One here
Okay,
first,
I'll
and
let you
then
take
we'll
lead.
come back around. So, excuse me. Here you go.
Is it possible to respond as the real work you do?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. Because I was wondering if, when I was thinking about how the plot changes, does your work involve locating the changes of plot changes within sort of a conceptual map of how this issue it's part of this other larger issue, and you know?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think each film, so the first film that Pallavi was making was addressing a particular set of issues, and that means that the movement that it's a part of is different than the next film that it makes. Doesn't mean that there aren't intersections, but what the final product of the film is going to be is going to really animate what its strengths are and what it can actually do out in the world. So absolutely, yeah.
A workout.
It's always an interesting challenge.
Hi. I have great empathy for the filmmaker that finds an amazing story while on assignment to doing something else. It happens to me often. And I wondered, you follow your passion because if there's a story on, let's say, a revolution that nobody else has and all the TV crews are going to be late to the game and you're there, then what's the ethical responsibility, because you're there on assignment for a specific and you communicate and they say, we need this now anyway? Is there an outlet for you, since you're there on somebody else's budget, is there an outlet for you to film on the side what you need to do while still fulfilling your obligation to your investors and then obligation to you as a filmmaker?
I mean, I think that's really important. You know, the film subjects are also partners in the film. I think that sometimes gets overlooked, but accountabilities, I mean, this is not new to anyone in here, but being accountable to the communities that are being featured in your film is also really important. And I think the mobility conversation becomes really important. So like, what are the variables that, like, having had the conversation about the mission and motives for everyone's participation helps to ground everyone on the film team, including the film subjects, and like, what is it that is bringing us all together? Why do we each care to be here? And when the concept or the mission of the film or the story shifts and changes, and what the campaign is going to be also shifts and changes around that, then that needs to be instantly. I mean, I've gotten into these hiccups before. I was working with a film similarly not very long ago where the partner was super, super invested in the project. The members of the organization were featured in the film. They'd put money into it. They'd hired me directly to work and develop their strategy, their organizational strategy around the film. They were just like soup to nuts, super involved. And then it turned out that it became pretty clear that there wasn't going to be a national broadcast on the primary feed, which made it difficult to create and develop the one-night-only momentum that they were hoping for and envisioning. It also became clear it wasn't going to be a culture change film. That's like kind of a trending concept, but like it didn't have the Hollywood buzz and heavyweights, but still they were involved, they were excited about it. And then, and they had been involved from the beginning. Then about a year into the project, when the film is ready to go, it turns out that we bring in a distribution team that has a really strong ethos of ensuring that supporting filmmakers and making sure that no film gets given away for free. And so at that point, a lot of conversations, obviously, like, the good thing about it is that we were being communicative the whole time. There was a lot of flexibility among all of the partners and all the different members of the team. So we worked it out, but it was really, I will be honest, it was really awkward after all of that investment of this partner for me to go to them and be like, so how much are you willing to pay? I was just like, ugh, like that's uncomfortable, but we did it. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I do think that having conversations about where the missions are aligned and why everyone is at that table, and then kind of imagining and thinking through, to the extent that it's possible, how we're going to work together and what are the various like shifts and changes that might occur along the way. Now, a shift in storyline is a really big one, but like Don was saying, like immediately having that conversation and seeing if there are other funders that you can pull in to help support that aspect of the work.
What if is there like an outlet? It's more like an ethical question.
Yeah.
You really have to shoot this, right? And you're honoring your agreement during the day, and then you're shooting what you know needs to be shot at night or something because you need to get it done. Mm-hmm. Is there an ethical line?
Well, what do other filmmakers in the room think? I mean, that's a question that anyone here can have an opinion on.
We have Morgan wanting to say something, so hold on.
Yeah, I think my question or comment sort of ties into what you're saying about the ethic, whether it's ethical or not. I think for me, having worked on a number of different projects that have dealt with different funding sources, defining whether you're a work for hire, at the very beginning, sort of defining that. Am I a work for hire? Is this really just me about serving you, quote unquote, as a client? And if that is the case, then it's a slippery slope to be moonlighting on their dime, essentially. But on the other hand, if you come into it and you're really upfront right away and saying, look, this is my baby, I'm telling this story, I'm going to try to incorporate some of the things that you care about, but ultimately I'm going to have the creative decision about how it's going to be made because my blood, sweat, and tears are in this film, and you're never going to be able to compensate me for how much work I'm actually going to put into this. And I think that's the biggest thing as filmmakers, is that I feel like I'm always constantly educating people about how hard of work and how many years of blood, sweat, and tears we put into this to get to the point of expertise. So anyway, that's
I think that's really valuable. Have you been in that situation before where you've introduced this conversation fairly early on? Is this like a practice for you of introducing the conversation?
Yeah, I mean, I just try to get it clear up front. Like, are you interested, am I serving your voice or am I serving my own voice?
Yeah.
And you're helping me do that because we have some cross, interest
That's
here.
awesome.
And I think that's just the slippery slope, is figuring that out up front. And, every personality is different. Some people can't handle that abrupt, in your face, like, let's figure this out now. And then some people want that clarity right away.
Yeah.
But I think your whole thing about communication is key.
Yeah, I mean, the producer in me, to answer your question, I think stepping back, what is harder than making one film, two films, right? So I think if it's a convenient way to try to get your cake and eat it, it's not. I'm hard pressed to believe that both pieces will become better because you're doing them, right? And I think there's probably a fundamental question of that conversation of whether or not this will serve their purposes. It's an important question to ask first. But even when I was re-looking at this, there could be a way in which you reframe it of, well, this will be an intimate journey of somebody working in this industry that will give people a relatable character through which to explore the issues. There are different ways of framing. You have to test that earlier, because the worst thing is you don't align and you have to unwind the funding deal.
That's right.
Like I've seen that happen, and that's got to be, giving money back is the most painful thing.
Yeah, right.
And there are usually lawyers involved.
Okay, so I'd like to move on to the next scenario if everyone's comfortable with that. Thank you, Pallavi. Yeah. Okay, now I'd like to invite up to the panel Don Valdez.
Right.
So many of you know Don Valdez as a filmmaker and for her work on the Push-Outs. But maybe you don't know that Don is also a social worker, a fundraiser, and an impact strategist as well. Don, will you tell us a little bit about The Teacher and Me, the film that you're working on right now?
Sure. Well, I'm crazily doing two films at once. So what is more painful and more difficult to do? They're similar. So the Push-Outs looks at young people who are being pushed out of our education system following a few key stories. And Teacher Like Me is a project that I started, I'm going to say 5 years ago, but I'm not sure. That follows a group of students who were push-outs who decided to go to school to become teachers, and are all coming from low-income and communities of color, and looking at the crisis of our teacher crisis, essentially. So,
Thank you for joining.
Thanks.
How much acting experience do you have?
Not much, but I did act in high school, and I grew up in Hollywood.
That counts.
Yeah. I don't know if that's good or really bad.
Cool.
Thanks.
Okay, so this film is untitled. It's called Untitled Music Biopic. All right, I'm not very good at titles. So this is a feature-length doc that contrasts the lives and deaths of three great artists during one of the United States' most divided moments: music legends Prince, David Bowie, and Tom Petty. Not just the story of three great musical artists. If anyone makes this film, I want a credit. I'm just saying. Not just the story of three great musical artists, but of a movement they were a part of, they spoke about, and that they were struggling in their own unique ways to understand, some quietly, some pointedly. The deaths reflected the mood and tenor of the moment they left and the different audiences they each spoke to. In part, a poetic exploration that contrasts their songs and lyrics against the backdrop of an emerging and complicated era. In part, a biopic. In part, a story about the people who went to their shows. Their music was the soundtrack to a generation. Their premature deaths are a signal to the next. Awesome, right?
Yes.
I want to see that movie. Okay, distribution milestones. A festival premiere. There's going to be educational distribution, and the filmmaker is pursuing theatrical and a PBS broadcast. Don, you want to run us in?
Sure. So my filmmaker realities are, I'm a pretty seasoned filmmaker, having been making films for decades, and when you think that one film takes decades, yeah. Anyways, actually most people in this community know me, and I have some cachet, if I do say so myself, and that makes me feel really uncomfortable. So, this is a part, right?
Yes.
I'm used to making feature-length documentaries about social issues that people really care about, and I'm excited because I'm hearing from my distributor that I'll be able to make a strong return on the most recent film I'm working on, and I really need this bad.
So distributor realities. I'm excited about this film. It's going to have broad appeal and celebrity buzz is great for business. We're seeing all the stars align, literally. We have exclusive rights to the theatrical, and we need to keep track of the film with strict limits on who can see it before then. So we're going to be the clamp.
I am the strategist, and I see a real opportunity for this film to advance the work of racial justice organizations that I work with. It's light enough to have broad appeal, and with a little bit of framing, I think it's going to help connect disparate audiences and fans to the growing movement. So I'm building those relationships right now. There's lots of interest in doing star-studded sneak preview screenings to lift up the work and message of those organizations all across the country. But I don't do any distribution, and I don't do marketing. I'm planning to work with the filmmakers, distribution, and PR teams to ensure that the mission and social impact emphasis is integrated throughout all of their plans.
So public media realities, we see this as an opportunity to engage younger viewers in public media and hopefully grab a bunch of them as new members. We secured a mainstream corporate underwriter to help us. We tend to shy away from funding hard-hitting films about social issues. After all, a lot of our funding is public money.
Okay. All right, Don, you want to kick us off?
Okay, great. Okay, so public media. It's great to see you all. Thank you for agreeing to join us for our first face-to-face. Now that the film is done and your theatrical release is coming in a few weeks, we thought it would be helpful to get an update where everyone is at.
Yeah, I'm like super excited about the progress we're making, and I have to tell you, Pink just confirmed that she's coming to the New York City release.
Yay!
So it's her, Van Jones, and Misty Copeland.
Yes.
And they're all going to co-present the film. And Sarah, what other updates do we have?
Well, it's super exciting. The New York City Black Lives Matter is going to be a co-sponsor of the film, and all the proceeds for the event are going to go to them. So we're really excited.
Oh, I don't know if that's a good idea. I'm personally a supporter of Black Lives Matter, but this isn't a news angle. This is cultural.
Yeah. I understand. But the vision for this campaign and the effort was really to bring new allies to the racial justice movement. That's the whole idea.
Sure, we wanted new allies, but not these allies. We want to let's bring people together, not tear them apart.
Oh, well, we're hoping, I like that big tent approach. We'll put our heads together and we'll come back to you with a plan that we think will work for everyone. Right? Are there any other updates our partners are interested in community screenings or?
Well, all the partners that I've been cultivating are really excited. They want to be involved. They're really going to get this film out there. So we have interests all across the country in all the key cities that we talked about. The thing is, as you know, most of them can't afford to pay, right? Like this is not Silicon Valley here. This is.
Well, why is that? I thought we talked about this.
Yeah, it's not like, when you have people who are working in tech or in these other sectors, they do have a lot of funding, but this is a volunteer-run movement. A lot of these organizations are volunteer-run. They don't have a lot of funding, so if we really want to have an impact, we can't expect them to pay.
Yeah, I understand that, but let me get this straight. Wait a second. So we're going to give away my film for free. And then in the case of our premiere, we're going to give them whatever we make? I mean, I put my own money and time into this.
Well, maybe I'm going to go off script here a little bit and say, as the distributor, we've worked with some films and been able to get foundation support to support some free community screenings. So maybe there's an opportunity for us to tap into some foundation money, so we're not looking at where that screening campaign, which is really important for impact purposes, is underwritten as part of the distribution of the film.
That's a great idea, and I think you're probably right. We can probably work with some foundations who would help us do this, but I'm still, I really want the film to be in the hands of people who can use it. That really is my primary goal, and at the same time, I want to take care of myself and try to make a career out of being a filmmaker. So what's the update on the theatrical? And, maybe with the foundations and the theatrical, I can, recoup some of my money?
Well, I'm excited to report we have 20 cities booked across the nation. But it's a situation where really that opening weekend box office is really going to drive the theater's willingness to schedule more. So we're really going to want to come up with a strategy and maybe engage some of these community groups around getting people into the box offices. So that's something to talk about, the value of an impact campaign that's funded or underwritten by a foundation, and maybe there's an organization where we want to go that direction, versus maybe having that same funding used to help to give tickets for a theatrical release, the first weekend of the theatrical release. So then we're driving those people to the theaters with free tickets and helping to support the theatrical release of the film and build upon that.
Great.
Yeah, it sounds great. That's sort of what Get Out did, right?
Yeah.
It sounds like a great strategy.
Cool.
And you're going to be doing the PR around this, right?
I thought you were going to hire a PR team.
Okay. Are you sure? Wait. Are you going to do the PR around this?
No, we're more of a theatrical booker, so we don't do the PR. But that's important to the work we do.
Okay. Nice. Thank you, Dawn. And I want to acknowledge it towards the end there. That was actual improv. Yeah, nice work. All right, Dawn, how familiar does this scenario seem to you?
I was feeling like I was having a flashback. I really feel like in my first film, I definitely, I went into it thinking I'm going to get, yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm used to, as a person who's come from the nonprofit sector, NGO sector, I'm used to like wearing every hat, doing everything. So making films felt very familiar to me in that way. But the PR and the marketing piece and the trying to get a distributor and doing all of that was really, really challenging. Mm-hmm. So it seems familiar, and also I feel like as a more seasoned person, like I should not get into that situation again.
Yeah.
And yet, the field is changing, the way distribution happens is changing, the way like people are learning about these films is changing, and it's a constantly moving thing. So mm-hmm. I feel like, on the one hand, like I should know better, and on the other hand, I can totally see walking into a situation like that again. So.
Well, in your experience, what conversation needs to happen, and like when to avoid this kind of crash and burn scenario that we just saw?
Yeah, it's so difficult because part of it is, with social issue films. I'm thinking, in my experience, we get funding from foundations, we're getting funding from. People who are concerned about the issues. So hopefully these conversations are happening actually before your film is completed, mm-hmm. that you're having these conversations along. And that includes like having a broadcast, or even if you don't have you don't have a broadcast until you get a rough cut done or get it, to fine cut, you at least have a sense of who is going to be interested in broadcasting in it. And maybe some of the money that you've brought in is from mm-hmm. public television. So there's not necessarily a guarantee of like a first strand, but that there's some kind of support to get into, to get a public television broadcast. Mm-hmm. So I think it happens in stages, mm-hmm. and it happens, over time and mm-hmm. thinking about things. And often, I think the reality is it does have a lot of the really painful conversations happen at the end, because mm-hmm. you don't know what your film is until you're done with the film. I mean, we're still editing
Yeah.
the push-outs, you know?
Don, what do you think about the scenario in terms of like how familiar is this? And both, I'm actually curious about two aspects of the conversation that we just had. One, the funding question and the return to filmmakers, but also the public media position on this particular film.
So if you notice, when there was conversation about money, I was super quiet. And that is a reality in terms of public television, where you know, and I think as we see the emergence, before we were meeting, of Netflix and Amazon and these real mega investors commissioning entities now, you know, even entities like HBO and public television have really become less able to provide significant production resources. But that said, public television is a very interesting place to launch your film, but in terms of revenue, it's a terrible place presently, and I don't think that's ever going to be recovered, right? We had a filmmaker from China last week who came in, and he's like, I'm really trying to understand how do I get money from public television, right? And then I realized the question was more, what can you get from public television that can be leveraged in benefit of the production, right? So I can get him a letter from PBS that would state that they're interested in airing the show, and he can leverage that to get international co-financing. So it's really sort of a delicate interplay in terms of what you can get to benefit you. But if you're looking for finances from public television, that's not perhaps the right place to start. I think, as was mentioned, if you get a primetime show, you can garner national press. That's incredibly valuable, but that is not directly related to production funds or revenue. It's really sort of an entree into other opportunities. And then the other political part of the conversation, absolutely, it's public television is in the midst of another cultural debate, right? So, and it has been since the NEA was under you know, it's been a better part of 25 years now. With a film that was made here, you see, you know, with Tongues Untied, right? So it started almost in this exact neighborhood 25 years ago. Those battles will continue. And unfortunately, the way, as a member of public television, we view it as a more progressive element of public television is the only entity in culture where it sort of evolves backwards. Where you think culture should move forward, but in many ways, public television was more progressive. So you just have to be a little more sophisticated about what you gain and what you lose. It's a balancing act that I don't think had to happen 20 years ago.
Christine, the new distribution realities, I mean, both, if you could also even just speak to the last scenario and this scenario, like what, in each case, like we're dealing with a whole really shifting landscape right now, and I'm really curious how it's influencing the scenarios like this that you're seeing, like what's changing.
Sure, and I'm glad I get to talk about both scenarios, because I think this second scenario, the reality is it's not going to be hard to get distribution for a film about Prince and Tom Petty, and I mean it's going to happen, and it's, you know, I think the challenging piece of that scenario is this idea that we want to build in an impact campaign that addresses those issues. So I think that's a project that you start really early with, and that is the focus of where you're putting your energy into figuring out what are the partners, because you're going to have a lot of interest from many different partners. I would imagine Netflix, you know, all of the big players are going to be interested in a film like that. So then it becomes about the negotiations around who is going to allow you to do what you want to do and accomplish with the film. And that's where having, I think, a sales agent on board to help you with those conversations and help you sort through the opportunities can be really helpful, and a strategist who can really bring to the table what the possible impact campaign opportunities are for the film. But, you know, the other scenario, I think, is more commonly the kinds of films we're working with, where they're not high-profile films. They're not readily, they don't have the distribution runway just laid out for them, like the second scenario.
Yeah.
And in that situation, you know, it is the case that, you know, more recently, Netflix, who was really a great source of revenue for documentaries, because they were not only acquiring for their Netflix originals department and division, but they were also doing a fairly robust acquisition of documentaries that are really great documentaries but don't have the big name director or the high profile issue going for them. So, you know, we were doing a lot of deals for international rights for documentaries, and in the last 6 months that shifted, and they're no longer funding that budget to the degree that they used to, and they're moving a lot of that revenue into the original side because they're really more and more, and I'm sure you guys are all reading this, you know, people are recognizing it's about, you know, they want to own their content. They want to take it on. They want to have some involvement in the editorial piece in some cases, and they want to own it, and that's what's important to them. So as a distributor, what we're doing now is we're looking at, you know, films. Let's take the first scenario, you know, where we are talking about a scenario where it's going to be tricky for a Netflix to be interested in a story like that. If it's a story that rises to the level where it gets a Sundance release, that changes, of course, the picture dramatically, because there are also these new kind of industry, it's not so new, but there are these kind of points where the platforms are all really coming together and competing against each other, and Sundance is one of those places. Berlinale is another place. And that's creating some buzz in the marketplace for those films. And you know, that's this many of the documentaries that are produced, and they're not. Most of our films don't make it into those major festivals. So, what we're doing then with our films is really talking to filmmakers about the territory, the traditional territory by territory release strategy. Public broadcasters are really still buying, and that still can be a major source of revenue. But we're always going to take it to Netflix, and we're always going to take it to Amazon, because those deals can be so lucrative. That's where a lot of the money is right now. But then we come back to you as the filmmaker and say, well, okay, what's more important to you? Because if you're going to go to a Netflix where your film's going to be released globally, it's going to be accessible, but they don't put any PR and marketing behind the international release of the film. So if it's important that the film be seen, you're probably better off going with a territory by territory distribution strategy through the public broadcasters. And we're just in the process of working out a coalition of broadcasters that have gotten interested in the idea of leveraging their power by acquiring films as a group rather than as individual broadcasters. And what's nice about that is we'll go into Sundance this year with that coalition assembled and look for a film. And in that case, what we can say is, you know, the film will definitely be shown in all these countries, and here are the viewing statistics of all these broadcasters. And so you have a sense of who's going to be watching your film. And of course, Netflix doesn't share that information. So.
Yeah, so I want to open it up. There's obviously a lot of things to talk about in this scenario. I mean, different stakes in the issue, different ways, basically like one option is getting the film out there. Another option is actually having it have an impact in particular communities and doing certain things. So, like, what's jumping out at you guys about the scenario? Like, what concerns you? What questions might you have about it? Yeah.
I'm speaking a little bit awkwardly about this. I'm not a direct filmmaker, but
Or all about
wife
awkward
and
conversations.
co-producer of a filmmaker.
And the thing that jumps out at me is, as an industry, if documentary is now shifting to this idea that, oh, we can make money, Netflix, for instance, as filmmakers, the question seems pertinent if you look at cinema in general and how broadly that's changed. If you're looking at the listings now of what's available, it's not very good, and it's being diminished. The more and more Marvel movies that come out and other movies of that ilk that have commerciality in mind, I think there's a little bit of a concern for me as a filmmaker and a viewer that doesn't happen to documentary, that we don't now degrade what it is, the stories we want to tell,
Absolutely.
and shift how we're going to tell them so that they become a commercial venture. That would be my response initially.
Absolutely. Well, we were just having this conversation about the importance of keeping small shop conversations and being nimble and flexible so that you can really meet exactly, so like more niche so that you can really meet all the needs of the stakeholders who have different values and different missions than some of these larger big beasts. So I think that there's been a lot of conversations about that as well. Other questions or comments?
Got some here. Hold on. Ariana, you're up. Here you go.
Hi, this is a question for Sahar, I think the real Sahar.
The real Sahar.
So you had that hypothetical about BLM being involved, and I liked how the filmmaker said, I'd like to see a big tent approach. Have you seen in your work that happen where a filmmaker has gotten into bed early with a certain organization and then other partners don't want to jump on, or there's a conflict?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that happens, and that's where the big tent approach can be challenging because the bigger you get, sometimes the less focused the ask can be, or the message can be. But those are conversations that you need to be having all along the way, right? There are sometimes territorial issues where one organization is like, wow, you have all these other partners on this project. We actually don't play nice with that partner, or we don't like their approach to this particular issue, and I don't want to be associated with them. Or like those kinds of things come up all the time, absolutely. And so being really clear about what the focus of, so just because you see two people are seeing the same film does not mean that they are understanding the same campaign. So being really clear about what the objectives of the campaign are, like in this case saying like, no, actually the whole point of this campaign is to get all of these disparate communities and fans of these artists to support the Black Lives Matter movement. Like that's why I got involved as a strategist in this film. That's why all these other partners got involved. And now like we're supposed to like take a cultural approach perhaps or something, like that's not exactly, those are different missions.
I just want to know how an independent filmmaker was able to work with the estates of Tom Petty, David Bowie, and Prince, and secure all the rights you would need, especially Prince, for the music and the footage.
I think this was a little magical thinking, honestly. No, but I have known people who have access, to people that you'd be surprised about. I mean, I think I know somebody who's making a film about Leonard Cohen, and that seems really difficult to do. But, I think if you're determined and you've got an idea, I mean, you can find people. If you don't have the direct connections, you can find people to do that. I think it's, I think that's one of the things I love about the independent filmmaker world is that, like, we're like, visionaries and storytellers. If we think it can be done, we're going to, get it done. It's kind of shocking. I don't know all three, but,
That was a good answer. I didn't expect that.
Oh, I think it's a good question. I think those things are good questions because I think it's often the thing that stops people from following like their dream of what they want to do with their lives, right? Is that you think, and it's good I'm not saying you shouldn't think about what the barriers are because they exist, but I mean, making money as a documentary filmmaker, that is not my primary focus or goal. So I think when you ask that question about that, that's not my primary focus or goal. Although I do want to get paid for my work.
Absolutely, and we need models that are making filmmaking sustainable.
That's right, and not just paid at the end of the film, but actually while I'm in production.
Yeah, I mean actually the musical genre. If you look at documentary the last 5 years, there's been more. That's been an explosive genre, and I think there's a particular talent. I just saw like on Showtime they had this George Michael documentary that had to be done with the estate, right? Yeah. So the bigger question of music are rights, and you have to have the estate behind you in order to cut you good deals. But I think it's important to look at the trends going on of like, who's going to do an in-depth historical documentary anymore? Nobody's giving resources, foundations don't have any money. Everybody's doing a verite character-driven piece because you can shoot. So I think stepping back, it's like what kind of films are not branded content that are compelling that you're going to make a living off of? Mm-hmm. Good luck. Mm-hmm. It's very hard. So.
It kind of brings the question kind of brings it to mind. Just sort of like this is that later down in the process, but I have a question about like how do you even get to that point? I'm working on a documentary film on the high demand market on human eggs, and the impact on women who provide eggs for other people's babies. And I've tried every single funding angle I can. I've got an Emmy Award-winning executive producer who wants to see my rough cut, but I can't even get the rough cut to the point where I can actually hand it to her in a way that I feel is going to be at the level that it should be in order to get to this person, and be taken seriously. So, I mean, how do you even get to, as a first-time filmmaker, how do you even get to that point where not only do you have somebody's attention because of the subject matter, but you keep their attention and then get their support?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I mean, there's, you know, the next scenario is probably going to be interesting to you because we're going to be talking about corporate underwriting, which is not necessarily the answer, but it's like, because this is an issue, there are some people who are turning to looking at other innovative options. But do you have a?
I would consider an executive producer who might have done a film in this subject. Well, not the exact subject, but in the subject area, right? So who may be in science or reproductive or however, and then they can sort of. It's incredible in the last 15 years. Some films might have 10 executive producers.
Yeah.
Some to fundraise, some content specialists, some understand how to put that kind of film together. And something tells me before you go, because then they'll know the editors and who funds. And that's what I do.
At one point, you mentioned foundations step in to sponsor the free tickets. Could corporate CSR also work there? And if yes, what are the pitfalls, if there are any?
Corporates. We haven't done it with a corporation. We have presented the idea as a proposal. We're working on a film right now, In Pursuit of Silence, and it has, as an executive producer, an organization in the UK called Quiet Mark. And Quiet Mark is really mission-driven around creating more quieter spaces in our communities. And they have relationships, long-developed relationships with BMW and Dyson and Miele and all these big brands that have worked to make quieter products. And so we're in the process of we found a distributor in Germany for them, and they're working with Quiet Mark. And we proposed a bunch of different scenarios where Quiet Mark could come in and help underwrite the cost of the release of the film in Germany, because it's a film that isn't necessarily a commercial film, and so it's been difficult to get traditional distributors on board. But they ultimately decided not to go that route where they were funding tickets that was presented to them in favor of actually funding a base level of the release. And we decided to do that primarily because the distributor was more comfortable with that. You know, it meant that their costs were covered. They had kind of their network of people that they knew they could go out to and felt like they could get ticket sales moving. And the distributors, really the piece that was most missing for them was this piece to get the costs covered to start the whole process of the release. On our educational side, you know, which works in the domestic market, we've had a number of films that we've worked with get foundation support. And the way that works is a foundation decides to give a grant, and usually this comes through the relationship with the filmmaker and maybe an impact team that's involved in the film. And ROCO, we come in and help support that. We've been involved and can provide some information on how it's worked and how to put that kind of proposal together. And then the foundation has supported, it's been a block grant, usually of $50,000, with the metric of getting it out to X number of schools around the country. And so then ROCO reports back to the foundation, this is who's gotten the film, this is where we are on the process. So we're then taking on the responsibility of kind of doing the back end work, reporting back to the foundation. And that's worked really well because a lot of the films that we end up working with, a lot of your films are issue-driven films where that educational semi-theatrical market is really a sweet spot. And what a campaign like that can do when you can get, the film out, in a concentrated period of time, which is what a block grant allows you to do, it can help drive the marketing and other institutions become interested because they're hearing that these institutions are showing the film and it creates some buzz. So it's a great strategy. So yeah, I threw that idea out about buying tickets, because we've proposed that, and there's been interest in a couple of different areas, but we've actually never had somebody go through that process specifically.
The only note I would make about corporate sponsorship is that if you are working towards getting onto public television, sometimes there are limitations to which corporations you can have. And I'm not sure if there's like some separation between the production dollars and distribution dollars, but generally you have to disclose all of that, including, and also individual donors as well. So there's definitely some tricky things around. And it sounds like your next scenario is.
Well, I'm wondering, should we do the next scenario?
Yeah. It looks like there were other questions, but I don't know, maybe we could do.
Yeah, sure. One final question. There's a burning one back there. David, you're going to get a workout.
I swam this morning, so.
I wanted to ask the real Christine to comment on the performer Christine. So you were talking about Netflix and that you wouldn't be able to, the Netflix deal would be the lucrative deal, but then you wouldn't be able to have the international rollouts. Is that because Netflix is closed to any kind of deals like that? I mean, I'm thinking of, I'm going to make up a scenario. So let's say it's a movie that's something about Greece. Would they be willing to take Greece out of the equation and have the filmmaker create a different kind of distribution scenario in Greece, or are they just closed to all of that?
They will occasionally let you take a territory out. It's getting harder to negotiate that. They're just getting less flexible in those areas. But I think when you can make a compelling case, and we do this, I think Netflix will sometimes be willing to do that. I would say, it used to be about a year and a half ago, we could get contracts structured so that Netflix would allow us to go out to public broadcasters. And the way that worked was initially we could go out to public broadcasters and do those deals, and Netflix was okay with that. That was about 4 years ago. And about a year and a half ago, they let us do it if we would agree that the broadcast had to be synced up. Because what happened in response to that is the public broadcasters said, if we're going to go out at the same time as Netflix, which is what Netflix was requiring, we have to be allowed to go out exactly the same time.
Which
as
filmmakers
Netflix.
allow. Which is
Great, because then you're getting the best of both worlds, right? You're getting the PR from the broadcasters, and you're getting, those deals are becoming harder. And then the other thing that we've noticed is because about the last couple of years, it's been the case that US sales agents are having a lot of those conversations with Netflix. And the international sales agents aren't always involved in those conversations. US sales agents aren't always aware of the value of trying to negotiate that piece, that you can go out simultaneously and that they do allow you to do that. With their straight acquisitions. With their originals, it gets more intense and more difficult. But I think that when we're involved, we're always looking to negotiate that simultaneous release, and then it's get the film out as quickly as possible to make sure we can get as many of the public broadcasters on board as possible.
Thank you, Dawn.
Yeah.
So we're going to do one more quick scenario, and then we'll open it up for conversations about that scenario, or you can introduce any of your own scenarios in this final session so that we can workshop those as well and just hear some of the hiccups that you all are having. But before I do that, I want to note that Maya is here from the Active Voice Lab back there. And Maya, if you could hand out those worksheets. There's a tool, it's a work in progress, it's a sneak peek at the 4Ms methodology, a framework that you all can use to think through some of the different tricky conversations that you might need to have in order to ensure a successful partnership that is taking into consideration all the various dynamics that might come up. It's, like I said, a work in progress. So if you have ideas for things that are missing from this, or anything along those lines, we hope that you'll email, there's an email on there, you'll email those ideas over so we can work together as a community to make it a stronger resource for everyone. With that, I want to invite our third filmmaker. How is it going, everyone? Is this working for you? Yeah? Okay. Good.
We need some more applause on that. Could we get a little more robust? Now, again, remember that this is being videotaped and it will be on our website. There will be a transcript of this as well, so check back on our site.
Okay, so our final filmmaker, Brave Soul, is Laura Van Zee Taylor. Will you please come up? Hi, Laura.
Hi.
Laura is working on her first feature film. She's a new filmmaker, 5 years now in the making. You come from corporate creative strategy and are now a filmmaker. And the film that you're working on is called I Am Maris, Portrait of a Young Yogi. Will you tell us quickly a little bit about it?
Sure. It is a movie about a young woman, a teenager, who still suffers from severe anxiety and depression and eventually a life-threatening eating disorder. And it's really a story of her recovery through yoga. And she's also an artist, a painter, and a writer. And so it's really actually quite a hopeful and helpful story. And Christine and Rocco is actually executive producing it, which is wonderful. And my producer, Ariana, is here as well. So
awesome. Yay. Cool. Thank you. So the third film, I actually gave this one a title. It's really good, you guys. It's called The Illustrator. And you're about to see why it's a super lame title, actually. Okay. This is a 60-minute documentary that tells the story of a comic book illustrator, a Taiwanese stay-at-home dad who is second generation. He cares about two things, his art and his family. He recently did a 23andMe DNA test and found out a major part of his bloodline is from a country, Oceania, that is now threatened by global warming. The notion of taking his son to go explore the region has taken hold of his imagination, and this may be their last chance. So they're traveling on a budget, and he's illustrating the whole time, a project that he plans to turn into a graphic novel about the love of a son and a father and their adventures, something he hopes to get published. All the while, he speaks eloquently about the commodification of the art form. The distribution milestones for this film were that there's going to be a festival premiere, or a number of them, iTunes and VOD, as well as community screenings. Would you kick us off with the filmmaker realities?
Sure. So this is my third film, but my first documentary. And I am, for the most part, used to working on scripted indie films, mostly dramedies. I actually made a dramedy in school.
Awesome.
The subject of this film I'm working on is a friend from high school. I saw on Facebook that my friend was planning a trip with his son, and I just knew it was going to be a very fun and beautiful project to take on with him. So at this point, we have a fine cut of the film, and I'm really eager to get it out there.
Okay, distributor realities. I'm excited about this beautifully shot film. Think The Eagle Huntress meets Fantasia, but in the style of the artist's own work. It's going to do well in my art house circuit and internationally, and market my distribution company is really trying to grow right now. I can see this film appealing to international broadcasters who have travel channels, and it's also an innovative approach to what can be pitched as a story about global warming. I know the film is going to do well in the educational distribution market. Junior high school teachers are always looking for content to help students explore their identities and culture.
The strategist realities. I got into the impact strategy arena in film because of my activism. I see film as a powerful tool for change, and that is my priority. I would be doing other work if I didn't believe in it. So I don't do distribution, promo, or marketing. Really, I'm more of a researcher and a partnership person. I focus on policy, advocacy, and movement building in tangible ways. That's what inspires me the most.
Corporate underwriter realities. I heard about this film when a fundraiser approached me at an event. My company has recently started to channel a bigger portion of my advertising budget to branding content in films and television. Stories help my brand to craft an identity that our target audiences like. I'm excited about this film because it is on brand in terms of showing that our outerwear company, Cartagena, is all about adventure and exploration. The father-son dynamic will be perfect for Father's Day and capturing the attention of the Boy Scouts this summer. And I love this story, but I do want a new creative team and prefer Final Cut. It needs to match other company branded pieces. And why a longer film? Short is best with corporate supported content.
All right. So Laura, will you kick us off?
I'm really happy to introduce all of you to our new impact producer. We're so glad you agreed to join the team. I was so worried because the funding applications about impact, which is true. I was just talking to you about this morning. This just came up for me, and I was like, what's that? So I'm really glad to have you so you can help us figure it all out.
Awesome. Yeah, it's great to meet everyone and to be working together. Thanks for bringing this call together, Laura. So I watched the film and did some preliminary research, and I see really good potential. In fact, I'm getting a lot of great feedback from feminist and Asian cultural organizations that this film is going to be useful to talk about breaking stereotypes. I think I can build out a plan that will drive this home. One of the groups has a ton of ideas for the classroom curriculum as well, and would be able to weigh in so that they can integrate the film into programs about those issues that they support all across the country.
Oh. But really, the film is about so much more than that. It's really about love and family and facing the unknown. It's about following your dreams, and they're going to make that curriculum for us? I mean, because we already have different plans for the curriculum, right? It's going to be great for junior high students who are creatively exploring their identity, and it should be fun. I mean, I'm a feminist, but I don't really see the feminist angle here. And but we can talk about that in a separate call. Let's hear from our fundraiser who has an update. Whoever is in a cafe, could you please mute yourself?
Okay.
Okay, fundraiser. So, well, do you want the good news or the bad news first?
Yep. Bad?
Most of the issue funders out there are focused on some crisis issues at the moment: healthcare, climate change, etc. It's good there may be interest in value in these other angles about stereotypes, but I fear it's not hard-hitting enough on any of them. For example, for the ones focused on climate change, your film doesn't go enough into it for them. For example, delving deeper into sea level rise. Also, they might not want one person to be the only character.
Okay. Oh, what's the good news?
Well, the good news is corporations are starting to see films as a great asset. And recently, I got the attention of Cartagena, a high-end outerwear company that wants to underwrite the campaign and production so long as they can brand it. What do you think?
You're still on mute.
This is so me, too. Technical difficulties, just letting you know. That's so me.
Okay.
I did take acting.
Where am I? Oh, okay. I like the idea. But the thing is, my friend, who the movie is about, I don't really think that will go over very well with him. I mean, the whole film is about talking about the purity of art.
Well, they are willing to pay $300,000 just to have the logo at the end.
Oh, well, let me check.
Whoa. Sorry, I was on mute. I'm sorry you couldn't hear me. I I have to say, the logo at the end is a problem. You know, the European public broadcasters that we would go out and pitch the film to won't be willing to keep a logo on a film. So, you know, in fact, they have us sign a form, you know, often saying that there's no branded content in the film. And so, you know, if we decide to go that route, we're really giving up a lot of the international public broadcaster distribution of the film. And the theatrical distributors similarly have to be very careful about when they release a film that involves brand support, because it makes it difficult for them to position the film with film critics and film reviewers and their people who they want to get behind supporting the film.
Filmmaker looks defeated.
Thank you. I think that's the end, right? Yep. Yeah. That's the end. Awesome. Thank you, Laura. All right,
You should be a script writer.
What's that?
I think you have a future in script writing.
So, Christine, we already kind of started to talk about these kinds of scenarios. Anything else that you want to say about this kind of scenario and what the distribution realities are of it?
Yeah, I mean, I think it can work. It's just as we're experiencing with this quiet mark experience. It's about having the conversations with the brands and involving them in educating them around what the realities are in the distribution world, so they have a sense of what the limitations are in terms of what we can do. And you know, if you decide, you know, for example, a brand could get behind supporting an opening weekend release of a film, which, you know, that could be a great way to get the film out there, or maybe they underwrite a theatrical release of the film. So there are ways to do it. It's just, it's tough because that's a conversation you'd like to have when you have the interest from the brand and you have a distributor on board. And so timing sometimes can be difficult because you've got the brand interest and you're hoping they're going to help you make the film and fund the film, which they did in the case of In Pursuit of Silence. They came on board as an executive producer and put money into the film. And then, you know, you're also hoping they're going to help with the release. You know, that's the time when you'll definitely want a distributor on board helping you have those, or a sales agent helping you have those conversations on board. And I feel like I should just take a minute and explain the difference between, I've been using these terms kind of back and forth, distributor versus sales agent. What I really mean by that is, you know, Roku as a company takes on a film as a sales agent, but we also act as a distributor because we're doing deals directly with broadcasters and directly with the platforms. So when we're going out with a film, we're going out to the international market, and we will sell all rights to a distributor. So in that place, we're more the sales agent, but we will also go directly to, when we can't get those all rights deals, go directly to the
really helpful
broadcasters.
Awesome, thank you. Don, so can you help us think through and understand really the realities of corporate underwriting and branded content, the differences between them, and what we're really dealing with here?
So maybe the perspective is that the corporations always view the work as branded content, right? They believe that they're funding something that will extend their brand. And then, but the question for the filmmaker is whether you will be able to make the film you want or you're commissioned to make the film for them. We've seen a lot, at least where I work, and I think particularly in the Bay Area, there are a lot of filmmakers who are doing, a lot of documentarians doing branded content work for Facebook, for Google, for different corporations. But it's rare that the branded content, in my experience, that we see align with the films that they're working on. It's more a way to make a living. But, and in my position in public television, it's really hard to find that alignment where you have a corporation who will leave the content alone, and they will be excited about supporting your project, and where you can have the total liberty to tell the story without inserting their brand. I've not seen a lot of experiences by which a film has partnered, an independent film has effectively partnered with a corporation. I think I'm sure they happen, but I think it's pretty rare.
I was thinking about the recent Vietnam War series. And it was less about the branding on the TV broadcast and more about the branding in every Bank of America office that I went to. And that's where I feel like they really got some bang for their buck by being able to plaster, you know, watch this, it's coming, blah, 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 blah. And they probably did somewhere between 4 and 6 weeks of advance advertising for it. So it struck me that it actually, I mean, I'm sure they paid millions of dollars, and I'm sure they didn't influence the final cut of that film. You know, because I can't imagine Ken giving anybody final cut.
Sure.
So I mean, that's a unique situation. So it's
It's a
hard
pretty-
to imagine
yeah.
what the next film would be that you could get Bank of America behind. So they'd be doing 6 weeks of pre-publicity for you. But it was striking, I thought, to, you know, experience it.
And it is hard, at least in the public television example. So Ken Burns is in a place of his own. You know, he also got, like with Emperor of All Maladies, when he got that show on cancer, I think Merck was an underwriter. He had a biofarm. That just goes to show he sort of deals with different rules. I think it's rare for an independent film to get corporate underwriting. I think it's more common for like ongoing series like Antiques Roadshow, American Experience, because they have that multiple play. I find it hard with corporate for single films because it's hard to demonstrate, at least on a broadcast or independent film, that you're going to get the metrics that they want, unless you're going straight into YouTube, or like Netflix won't even allow that branding, right? So, but it might be more for like new platforms like YouTube in particular.
I'm happy to take a question and then keep going. Yeah, go ahead.
Morgan, here you go.
I feel like I've heard a few companies out there sort of saying, you know, we'll throw money at something and we don't want any connection with us, but we just hope that there's some of the issues that we're concerned about that are just brought up in the process of making a project, but we don't want any logo or brand or association. We really want you to make the film you're going to make, but we would say that we would love for there to be some discussions around something. And I think that's a slippery slope, because I think that a lot of us have gotten into this because we come at it from more of a journalistic approach. And I think there's, you know, and maybe the recent journalism grads in this room might have like the latest and greatest kind of feedback on that, but there's so much infiltration of corporate money in journalism these days. I'm really curious about, from your perspective, where those discussions go around money tainting projects and the like, and how people feel about that.
Yeah. I'm happy to have anyone in the audience respond to that.
Dawn, do you want to say something?
Yeah, well, I mean, I know of a couple films that I feel like did a good job of not kind of letting that happen. Baggett is one. I know that Baggett is a film about plastic and not using plastics, and she got a couple of corporations, actually Patagonia is one of them, because they use recycled bags. It's tricky. I mean, I'm like, who are you talking about, Morgan? I would love to know who those, because most of the corporations I know, even for the nonprofit sector, for NGOs, you know, they want to have their logo plastered all over our websites. You know, I do a lot of funding and fund development for NGOs and stuff. So I don't know. I mean, I think it's a challenging thing. I love the example of Bank of America. I don't know. I mean, there's definitely this movement in corporations to have some, you know, they have charitable giving and they have some social concerns. So, but they always are. It always is. If you're going to get a corporation to support or underwrite something, they're underlying. They may have money that they have to spend, right? Because they have a requirement to do that. But I think in general, it's always going to be for advertising.
Yeah, I mean, I'm curious to know, when do people feel like they're a journalist and when do they feel like they're a documentarian, and when is that line between, you know, making a movie versus making a documentary? It seems like that genre is blurring a lot, and same with journalism. And I feel like there's a lot of there's a lot in the world of quote unquote fake news. I mean, there's that whole thing too. Like if documentaries start getting regularly branded with this idea of being fake, where does that leave us as storytellers that want to tell quote unquote truthful stories? You know, and I just think there's a lot of it brings up a lot of bizarre questions for me and motivational questions and sort of, you know, anyway, brings up a lot for me.
Yeah, and I think having those I mean, I think talking about our values going into these relationships in general is like essential. I mean, one of the first things that needs to happen before any relationship is entered into. So that's out on the table, but what happens in the broader field and landscape is a big question.
We have a question here.
Yeah.
Sort of piggybacking off of your comment, it's sort of a blurry field right now, because even if you look at the New York Times, what they're doing with 360 video, which is full transparency, you see the whole thing going down, but they're taking money from Samsung in order to produce those videos, and they're being exclusively shot on the Samsung 360 camera for a large majority of them. So you can say, all right, New York Times is probably not going to write, you know, a good op-ed piece all about, you know, exploding cell phones and Samsung. But in the same instance, does it really affect their journalistic integrity if they're taking financing for just camera equipment? You know, Samsung isn't saying, hey, you have to make a story about our amazing facilities in South Korea. They're saying, shoot anything with this. Just, we like the idea that you're using our gear and our equipment. So that could be a good way for filmmakers to consider underwriting stuff, if you don't want to take, you know, money from anything that might have an influence on your subject matter. But camera gear, things like that, you know, catering, you know, free food, it's something that you can easily add to the end credits of your film. And I don't think, you know, PBS or any network is going to say, hey, you know, took money from the burrito spot down the street. You know, that's just at least my 2 cents on it. Having done a documentary which is all about cell phone radiation and long-term health effects, which was a feature-length film. We got a lot of offers from different companies that claimed to have the solution, whether it was like a headset or like a, you know, different case you could put on your phone to reduce the radiation. And in a lot of cases, we would take these meetings with these companies to hear them out, but at the end of the day, you lose credibility. So we had to sort of decide, okay, do we want more money for special effects, or do we want greater credibility? I think at the end of the day, credibility wins for journalism. For documentaries, though, if you're aiming to get Oscar nominations, you need to have a lot of money involved. And in fact, nowadays with the Oscars, you need to not only show in theaters in LA and New York, but you need to get a review in the New York Times or the LA Times. So ultimately, it comes down to New York Times.
I want to also, as David's walking to the next question, but just also, Laura, it strikes me, I don't want to presume what your position was at Corporate Creative Strategy, but this is a space that you also understand, so I'm curious what you've been thinking about with respect to this scenario and conversation.
It's funny, because like you're right, I was thinking that, it's like I think that way anyway. There's always a branding angle that you could take, and we're all always branding ourselves, our products, so I don't know. I agree that you don't want to look like you're selling something. So, because that would be like sort of the definite, you know, this is like anytime you see an ad or anything on you're scrolling through Facebook or whatever, and you start watching this little video, and then at the end they say, and we'll solve this for you with this, then you know, like, okay, no, like, you just lost all faith. But it's interesting. I'm going to ask Christine, real Christine, if she would have the same response, because actually, we haven't even talked about this yet, so we're going to have a real conversation here in front of everybody. Okay? In my film, my subject, Maris, and the film's already all shot, so it's not, the brander would not have any influence in this way. Maris is always wearing Lululemon yoga clothes. Maris is also a Lululemon ambassador. They have discovered her through her blog, and they love her, and you know. So would they be a possible funder for the film, or would it have the same sort of problems that you were talking about?
You know, this is the perfect time for us to start having because I think there are opportunities with this film, because a big part of the strategy behind this film is really getting it out to schools and colleges and universities. And the semi-theatrical community screening component is going to be so important for the distribution of the film that, I think there are ways to bring Lululemon into that could be exciting for them and also speak to our goals in getting the film out. And so maybe they, it goes back to that idea. If we did decide we were going to go the theatrical route with the film and we wanted to get them involved in that, in helping us connect to both in maybe buying tickets for the opening weekend, but also Lululemon has celebrity contacts. They have other maybe resources that we might be able to work with them to use on behalf of the film. And I think this film is a film that does potentially have that, celebrity. We've talked about this, right? There are celebrities out there that have been very vocal on this issue who could might very well want to get involved in the film. So, no, I don't see unlike this scenario, unless Lululemon was talking about putting their logo on the film.
Right, like she walks by a
Right.
Lululemon
Yeah.
store.
I know. I mean, because they've come on board, we would maybe want to create this boundary and say, no, their funding hasn't supported the production. That was entirely done by you and, the private funding we've gotten on board so far. And then Lululemon comes on board to support the outreach campaign.
The marketing campaign.
And the marketing, yeah.
Right. And I think, so thinking with my branding corporate hat on, if I were Lululemon and looking at my film, I would have to know what, every company has a very clear mission statement and a very clear, this is our brand and this is what we represent. And so you just really have to match those things together. And I don't know what Lululemon's is, but I assume that theirs is something about inspiring, the very best you, and which is what this movie does. So.
Yeah. Right.
Okay, so we have 20 or 30 minutes. I want to take the next question, but quickly just to say, what I hope is becoming really clear in all of this is, and in all of the scenarios, is that there are all kinds of different stakeholders that get involved in a film production or in a film process for all kinds of different reasons. And to be having the conversations about the how and the why, like what the mission and motive is for their participation, how you're going to collaborate, what that looks like, what the money question is, and what might change along the way is really vital because of all the variety that we're seeing in all these scenarios. And these are just three, but you can imagine there's like a plethora of other situations as well. So I would love to take this question and also any other questions that you have that don't even have anything to do with these scenarios. We have about 25 minutes left. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Oh,
yeah.
it seems like all of these documentary films, they're all different niches, and there's different niche markets. And I was wondering if you could talk a little more about colleges, libraries, universities, educational markets for short documentary films. I have a specific one on Hungary in the 20s and 30s, and it's a reverse migration story with original footage. Mm-hmm. And I've had some local distribution, and there seems to be certain niches. But what's the best strategy for getting your film out there to these niche markets?
So how long is the film?
30 minutes.
30 minutes. 30 minutes, I think that's, at least for international release, that's still a tough length. We're still being advised that broadcasters want an hour or in some and a feature occasionally. But really a 30-minute film becomes a little more difficult to program. I've just been really interested in that same issue because we took a 13-minute film out to the market 2 years ago. It's a film called Body Team 12. It was nominated for an Academy Award in the shorts category. And we did make a couple sales, but the market doesn't yet exist. I think there are opportunities like, I've heard, and I haven't done all my research on this, but there's a company out there, a distributor that is just working on shorts. Does anybody know the name of that company? If you come see me afterwards, I wrote it down. I don't remember it off the top of my head, but I can get that to you. Do you know it?
Canopy.
That's not it. Yes. But can I just say something about Canopy for her?
Yes.
I mean, I think if she wasn't asking really about broadcast in foreign countries, you were asking about distribution in America.
Yeah.
I think you should actually have a conversation with Canopy, which is, it's a, without going into the details, they are now the streaming service for all sort of educational programming that's going on college campuses today. And if they get interested in your film and are willing to do a little bit of promotion around it, and because your film's very specific, it just might work for everybody who teaches Eastern European history and blah, blah, blah. So I think a really good piece of advice for you is to get you to Canopy, and I can give you a name of somebody there.
It's with a K.
Yeah,
Okay,
Canopy.
I'll come and talk to you.
Don, what are you thinking? I'm seeing you move around, and I'm dying to know what you're thinking.
Well, a lot of stuff is sort of, it is, sort of thinking back, there are so many opportunities in filmmaking, but it really behooves you to get support on the producing side, on the sales side, just get a sense of what test the waters in terms of what your film could do, because I think, I was fixating on the comment you made earlier about journalism, right? So it's like, back with the earlier Iraq War, there was a slew of investigative films about journalism. And ironically now I'm not trying to be political, but there's so little investigative journalism filmmaking at a time when we actually need that, right? And there's so many cultural pieces now. But I think it's really important to figure out what is the core sort of kind of support, like who's going to support your film, whether it's corporate support, which I have very little faith in, but grants, I think people really need to learn in this day and age we've noticed crowdfunding has kind of replaced educational in our space, but really who is your family of supporters, and engage them early on and really get people to get you enough to produce your film. But I think it's really important to get that key. I just think there's a lot of mythologies in filmmaking. And so people as we were talking before, they fixate on a Netflix sale, a Sundance premiere. And so much time is wasted on really scaffolding the right strategy for your film. And you always leave that opportunity for the sky as a limit. But you need to be the expert on what people will want to do with your film. And I think that's fundamentally important right now, because I think that point about Netflix, like 2 years ago, they were acquiring so many films. So it wasn't just they were putting more money towards acquisition, but they would give a lot of films $30,000 to $50,000 to $100,000. And then now I read the other day, they're trying to premiere a new feature, documentaries included, every 10 days next year. And that's it. But it is all about original vision, new memberships, own content across the world. Right? So you just have to know who's going, 2 years, 3 years out. It takes so long to make films, so you should be the expert on who's going to use it and who's going to support it.
Sure. So I think the scenario that you played out on comics was something similar to my film, which is all about racism and stereotyping with the backdrop of comics and comic book creators. So bang on. So, I think you should have come on board much earlier. A couple of comments. First of all, I'm also on the jury of UNAF, which is United Nations Association Film Festival. And when I was on the jury, when we used to see a film, we were specifically asked to look at the credits and if there are any logos there. And then we had to research as a jury member. We used to split it up as to why that logo was there and what is the interest of that particular corporation there. So I don't know about other film festivals, but UNAF in particular was wanted to see what the logo was. And there was one particular film, I can't recall the name. It was about some eye doctors who went to Africa to cure cataract. And all throughout the film, they were wearing these jackets with logos of a particular company. So initially that film was rejected. And then later when we researched and we found out that it was just a partner organization and it was in the best interest of the film, we did kind of got it back. So that is one thing to look out for when you are looking at film festivals. They are watching the credits. My question specifically is around Netflix and Amazon. Now, I believe that, or it's my understanding that, independent filmmakers, it's difficult for us to approach them directly. They only deal with the sales agent. So could you just lay out the scenario if somebody wants to, reach out to these big organizations, besides having the Sundance premiere, which 99% of us would not have.
Right.
What's the way to reach out? Can you lay out the scenario for us, please?
You're right. Netflix is requiring that everybody work through an aggregator. And there are lots of different aggregators out there that work with Netflix. There are sales agents like Roku, but there are also Premier Digital down in LA has a relationship. There are lots of companies that do. When you go down that path with a company, I would just caution you to ask what is their approach in terms of how they pitch a film to Netflix. So, some of them, they just have a spreadsheet, and every film that they have on that they've gotten a fee to pitch to Netflix, they put on the spreadsheet, and they send that to Netflix, and they go through the spreadsheet and look at what they want to see and what they don't, and make decisions. So it's a little bit more of a, it's just they have a conduit for you. They're not doing an actual custom pitch of your film. Other companies will do more of that custom pitch, and it's more relationship-based, and that's how we work. So the downside of that is we're pitching just a small number of films to them, films that we've curated. But you can go to a Premier Digital or some of these other companies, and they can pitch your film for you. Distributor's another one that does that. And then, Orchard, I think also.
We have another 10 minutes or so before we were going to wrap up.
You were first. Hold on. Yeah, go ahead.
That's okay. Go ahead. But I kind of lost my train of
Oh, you did. All right.
Just want to thank you for this. I'm a new member of the Berkeley Film Foundation and just kind of been hanging around for a few months now. And thank you, everybody. So I am sort of getting started in this industry, although I do really feel like I know what I'm doing as far as the making of the film part of it. Mm-hmm. But I'm so glad that in the later end of this portion, people are starting to ask more of the unknowns, which is like what you do after you get the film made. Mm-hmm. I feel like that there's a lot of dragons that need to be slayed, and when you're kind of doing it yourself, filmmaker, you can only take on so many dragons at once. Mm-hmm. And so in order to not get overwhelmed, you do what you can. But that said, as ambitious as we are, what can you tell like someone who hasn't even been through the beginning to end process of like actually, making the film, but also having the experience under the belt of having it get out there to the public? What can you tell that person as far as strategies to have in mind so to be able to deal with those unknown dragons that are going to be coming my way? And then, so that's just a question for anyone. And I know that there's seasoned filmmakers in the audience, so I would love to hear from anyone who has any comments about that. I'm trying to acquire as much information as I can. In regards to Morgan's question, though, about journalism, I'll just tell him what I just learned a couple days ago. I was at a master class with IDA at ITVS in San Francisco, and they had a master class with Dawn Porter that I attended, and she has a film on Netflix right now about abortion called Trapped. And I was really impressed by Dawn, and I was glad to attend that. But she posed this question as well. Do you consider yourself an artsy-fartsy, just a filmmaker who just wants to examine, a character or how beautiful trees look, at Monterey Bay or whatever, but as opposed to a journalist? And some of the group hesitated because we don't consider ourselves journalists, and I'm one of those that hesitated. But I asked her specifically, I told her that I hesitated because I'm not a journalist, but she said that legally standing, you have more legal rights if you claim yourself as a journalist, as opposed to just being an artsy-fartsy filmmaker that just has a story to tell, and that there's some wisdom in that strategy. So I'm just leaving that on the table for what it's worth. But back to my question, I would just love to get some guidance and counsel for someone who's just getting started.
Yeah, you kind of have a whole ecosystem lens. Do you have a thought?
I'm a big believer in mentors. And do people favors, and then folks who've seen it before, you know, it's even you see here. It's a great community of folks. So really try to find people who've done it before.
I tend to do intakes with folks who like full hour to just like hear what they're dealing with and struggling with, and just offer up an overarching lens of like where I might fit in. I imagine that other people in their own realms that do distribution or whatever would also have a call and just really try to understand what it is that you're trying to accomplish with your film and your campaign. Like, is it just to get it out there broadly? Do you have like a particular idea in mind? And like working that through in some meetings or calls, I think a lot of people are, my experience has been most people are willing to have those conversations to get a sense. And once you start to do that, you'll be a little bit more oriented. You know?
And I would go back to, Don, your comment about, you know, I think it's critically important to really figure out who the audience is for your film. And as you're going through and making the film, one of the strategies around doing that is to put up, even if it's just a basic website, but a website for the film that's there when you start. So that as you're going through the process, you're collecting, you know, you have a form to collect people's contact information, so you get a sense of who's responding, who's hearing about it, who's interested. So kind of a nuts and bolts, just start gathering your data. And then I second the idea of mentors.
Well, we always like to
Are you
hear
going to address his question, or you have a new one?
Oh, if you're not done with this question.
Well, I was just going to say one little thing.
Okay.
That's okay. I'm not an expert. I'm a brand new filmmaker, so maybe I can relate to you in that way. I just decided, and I think somebody else, I think it was you with the embryo or the egg. Yeah. I was just going to make it, like, I was just going to do it. I did a whole Field of Dream thing. I was like, make it and they will come. So just like, which I know is hard.
Maybe 4, 5, 6 years later.
Yeah. And then make it as good as I could make it, make exactly what I want, and then share it with as many people as possible. And like, somehow that worked.
So maybe is that, you know, currently there are a lot of different incubators around the world, and you can apply, and they offer, you know, feedback with mentors, editors, distributors, sales agents, and you can, you know, be part of a system that it takes 1 year or 3 months, depending on what part of your process you are in the film. And it's amazing feedback that is really intense, and it can, you know, give you a lot of amazing tools to be able to release your film right away after the incubator is done. So I mean, I can recommend a couple of them to you.
I would love that. I'm in post-production, by the way. Just came back from the beginning. And it's not journalism, it's singularity. I like to call cinema singularity, where you're literally just watching stuff unfold and they're telling your own story. But thank you. I would like to visit.
Lauren, your question? Lauren?
Did anyone else want to comment on that?
We can also popcorn style it as we go. So there's
right.
Okay, my question is, thank you so much. This is great, and I loved your unique approach to presenting the information.
It's collaborative.
Yeah, like filmmaking.
Yeah.
So, okay, my question was, I'm pretty new to the documentary film world, just like about 3 years, and a lot of it has to do with fundraising, I found out. So I guess one of my questions is, for when you're approaching funders who are not these traditional grantors, like Cal Humanities or PBS, ITVS, how do you pitch the value of film and, you know, different ways they can use it? And I know production funding is very different from outreach and marketing funding. Is there an example of a successful corporate kind of sponsorship that's not like a grant or maybe not a foundation, that has contributed to production of a film? So sorry, sort of
Yeah.
a two-part question.
Well, I'll answer from the perspective of issue, and then I'm going to ask Don to respond however you want. But from the perspective of funders that care about different social issues, I have experience, like a lot of the issue-based funders are starting to take an interest in films that might advance their portfolios in different ways, as we saw in the first scenario. And oftentimes, like at one point, the Hartley Film Foundation had me on as their in-house strategist, where I would write, for a lot of the films that were in production, I would write out scenarios and strategies for if the film was going in the direction of what you have in mind, here are some tangible ways you might use it to advance a particular set of objectives that might align with different issue funders. And then I noticed, I didn't, that's not why I'm creating those strategies, it's just to like help ground the filmmakers in what they might, their stories might do. But I noticed that a lot of those funders or filmmakers started using my strategies to fundraise with issue-based funders. And oftentimes, or you can do that with a completed film as well. It's like if the film is done, there is a particular strength that it has if it's about a social issue, and identifying what that is and writing out a strategy for like how it might be used and who might watch it and where that might line up with what an issue-based funder might care about becomes a really powerful thing. So I have seen a lot of those strategies help to concretize and like help people understand and imagine the practical uses of a film to advance a portfolio. But I don't know, what are you thinking?
So the first part of the question, know what the funder's interests are, you tailor it, right? So we always try to understand if they're a pure grantor, if they're have particular priorities, but really just, fundraising is like exercise. You just got to keep practicing and you get good at it. And you can't, I guess the way to put it is can you over fundraise? I don't think so. I don't think you ever, you should, it's something you have to do to get good at. I don't think there are too many people who were naturally good at fundraising. They had contacts, they come from rich families, but you get good at it. And it also reflects how good you are at communicating what your film's about, right? So it's a double, and the feedback, if they don't like it, that will help you hone that message. And it also informs you in terms of the film you want to make, right? The corporate part, I think what I've heard anecdotally, we don't do a lot of corporate, is it's always helpful if you have somebody in that corporation who can help champion your project. And it's very hard to do cold solicitations to corporations. I think it's a lot easier when somebody there understands you, your relationship, or who can help you advance the interests.
Yeah, I'm surprised nobody mentioned something called Amazon Video Direct, and I was wondering if anybody has experience, because what you read from various filmmakers is either they're totally pros or totally cons. It's rarely in the middle. And from what I understand, there is not, of course, much revenue into it, but it's when you choose exposure over revenue. Just for those who haven't tried that, they're pretty picky about being very professional and having all the captions made. But this is something, I'm sorry to say, that we don't need any sales agent, that any filmmaker can do on their own. So I was wondering if there is any feedback from you guys at the panel or from other filmmakers in the room about it.
Yeah, I would jump in on that and say, it's funny, I was just having a conversation with a colleague this morning about Amazon Video on Direct, and we do put our films up on Amazon Video on Direct after we've done other things with it. So we don't want to go out first. We window, and that's one of the last windows that we'll tackle, is putting it up on Amazon Video on Direct. And the interesting thing about Amazon Video on Direct is you could put, your daughter's preschool graduation up there if you wanted. I mean, it is putting it in the giant, big, huge collection of content. Right. So I think you have to ask yourself the question, is this worth doing? Do I have the capability to drive people to Amazon Video on Direct to watch the film? And for Prime, yeah, it does, right. Right.
Yeah, I mean, it's very similar to this gentleman's question, too. It was just about self-distribution. And are you guys scared of self-distribution? Because I see a lot of fresh faces out here, and thinking about prenups. A lot of millennials are not getting married, so are they going to release these films themselves? And that was my question.
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate the fact that you asked that question, because I think we've been talking about that. In the context, Amazon has come out and they've named 4 festivals. It's Tribeca, South by Southwest, Sundance, and what's the last one? Toronto. And if your film gets into any of those festivals, they're willing to give you a deal for $75,000 to put your film up on their service as part of their festival selects. And that just started at Toronto.
Exclusively?
Well, I haven't seen all the details, so I don't know if it's exclusive, but it does prevent you from, for 2 years. So, that potentially could mean, there's not a need for a sales agent. I think it really comes down to what your goals are for the film. If you want a really robust strategy where you want somebody on board who's going to be able to not only talk to Amazon, but really go out there and actively pitch your film and see what the best deal on the table is and help you sort through that, I think a sales agent is always going to be able to come in with that expertise and help in that area. But I think there are pathways being developed that don't require a sales agent. Distributor out of LA is now setting up a service where you can go to them and they can get your film pitched to Netflix and on all the digital platforms. And it's a very transactional process, right? But it's not going out there to the markets. We go out there to the markets, meet with the public broadcasters, have long-standing relationships. So it really comes down to, where do you see the niche for your film? Maybe your film isn't a film that's going to appeal to global public broadcasters, but you really see the value of the film being in digital distribution. You have a ready audience that you've already aggregated. Then I would say, no, you don't need a sales agent to help you do that. There are companies out there that could help you do that. And it also depends, and I think you have to be realistic about this question, how much do you want to get into the distribution business versus be a filmmaker? Because some filmmakers are like, I don't want to have anything to do with that. I want to work forward on my next film. I've already got my project in the hopper. So is it work that you would want to be engaged in?
Next question here. I was going to respond to this real quick.
Me too.
There's a lot, just a quick cautionary note, there's a lot of, or I should say there are a number of unscrupulous sales agents and distributors, or at least they call themselves that, and they're really more interested in just getting a big lump sum of money from you up front before they actually deliver anything, and they want you to cover all their expenses. And anyway, they still, to this day, they still send me emails asking for, to open the door. So just anyway, I wanted to throw that out there because a lot of people get taken advantage of.
Well, I wanted to respond to that too really quickly. Sorry. There's hybrid models too. So, for instance, my first film was distributed by New Day Films, which is a co-op. And so, as a member owner, it's both self-distribution as well as being part of a larger cooperative. And so you don't always. So there can be places in between. I think self-distribution as a first-time independent filmmaker is really difficult if you want to make other films. Like if you want to spend all your time doing all of it yourself, that's great, and that's pretty much all you'll do. But if you want to be able to move, work on other things and also maybe broaden who gets to see your film, things like New Day Films is really amazing. I mean, it can be, and it's the educational market. And then the other thing I wanted to say was about Amazon. We actually my first film also is on iTunes and Amazon, but not until after 7 years of a pretty long tail of it being in film festivals and being in conferences and being in educational distribution. And I'm still making money on that, so it's cool. It's not a ton, but I did that through another distributor, which is Journeyman. So there's lots of, there's a number of different ways of doing it, and there's people who are writing about this stuff, so definitely research.
Yeah, and there are different strategies, right? Like some is like, if the focus of the strategy that you're developing is getting the film out there or getting money or having an impact, you need to scaffold all those on top of one another. Those are each different strategies, and how they all match up matters. If you release your film too early, or with an audience that is going to get a message about your film out there in a way that is going to shut down other audiences that you care about. I mean, these are all things and conversations we need to be having and thinking about.
Yeah, no problem. One other thing I would say about self-distribution is obviously it's a lot of work, but you do get to keep 100% of the sales that you do make. There's opportunities to sell some educational rights and then hold on to theatrical rights. Obviously, I think everyone knows about that too. I'm relatively new to the filmmaking world. I've helped produce a couple documentaries that kind of cover the intersection between climate and national security. And recently, our production company has formed into an NGO, a nonprofit. And I'm wondering if you guys, just had any experience in dealing with production companies that have shifted into the nonprofit space, and if you think that's a good idea from a funding perspective. And then the second part of that question, for a group like us who's interested in a specific theme and making films that are either episodic, it could be a series, or short films that kind of touch on a similar theme, we want to find partners and funders who are interested in all of our films and funding us, not necessarily in perpetuity, but for years at a time. I was just wondering if anyone had any thoughts on that. Or not necessarily film by film. I guess years at a time would be obviously very generous, but more so multiple films at a time as opposed to case by case.
I'm not going to be able to speak to that really because we're not generally involved. I think the idea of a nonprofit production company is really intriguing, and I think you're already set up to take on support from individual donors, and if you're doing a series or a group of films on a certain subject, it may be a really interesting model where you have corporate funders even, or funders, personal private funders, who come in and fund your production company, and they're not necessarily attached to a specific project, so it doesn't create some of those awkward relationships, but they're working with you because they're behind the mission of the group of films you're making.
Do you?
Yeah.
Do you work at Movement Generation?
No, I don't. It's called the American Resilience Project.
I'm just curious, David and Abby, I'm sorry to
Okay.
but just like you all, Berkeley Film Foundation just funded Movement Generation that created this series on gentrification. So I'm curious if you all have any insights about that process from them.
I'll let Abby speak. And for those of you who don't know, Abby is our board president, and I'm very honored to have her here. This is Abby Ginsberg, everybody.
That's not what occurs to me in answer to his question.
Okay.
So this what people are referring to is a web series that we just funded this year for the first time, which was called I think it's called The North Pole, and it was done by some local people, and it's, as Sahar says, it's on gentrification. And I would say it was sort of an experiment for us to see sort of where it goes and how it does, and maybe we would be more open to sort of the notion of funding a series of smaller films. That was a series of webisodes. But there is a model that a friend of mine actually did out of Austin, Texas. His name is David Modigliani. And I would say Google, do you know him?
I know him, he's great.
He's great, and he has managed this sort of methodology of funding. David's doing something else now. But Modigliani like the painter. And I would seriously just start Googling him, look him up, see what he's done, and they found a way of doing meaningful kind of social justice work for progressive corporations, I think is a way to say it. But they ended up and then occasionally they were able to kind of move to do their own thing funded by a progressive corporation that they had already worked with. But by cultivating people who had money to invest in video production, they ended up, I think, really being able to do a lot of very creative work that the rest of us have never figured out how to, sort of sustain ourselves quite as well. So he's my recommendation to you. And if just a last thought, which is that if you're in the climate change space, I mean, the guy who always comes to mind for me is Tom Steyer. I don't know how you get to him, but he's got more money than God, and he's local. So maybe, you know, if you feel like you're on the same wavelength as he is, try to find a way in to meet him, because he's somebody who could fund you from now for the next 40 years, if he liked what you were doing. All of us for the next 40 years.
And like I had said, the North Pole, this webisode that we just funded, is going to screen on Sunday at the New Parkway. So if you're interested, come see it, and then you can meet the filmmakers. We went out on a limb. We all feel really good about it, and it's already gotten traction. It's going to film festivals, and a lot of people are just loving it.
David, we have 15 minutes before we're going to end, so I just wanted to do are we good to keep going?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. All right, cool.
I paid. We can stay.
Okay.
Where's the next question?
I think his hand is up first,
Okay.
right here in the middle.
All right.
So right now already asking the question. Also, a new in filmmaking, with the opportunity of being able to pitch a film in a forum, and one of the exciting things was to see all these festival, head of acquisition people coming and being very excited, but also sales agents coming and pushing themselves in different ways. And in trying to choose a sales agent, I was wondering if, Christine, you can give us some advice in terms of, what are the no's when, the don'ts when someone, for instance, asks you, proposes a minimum guarantee that you are not really happy with, and they're really pushing themselves, or what are like some of the things that you can do in order to make a good decision?
About a sales agent. Well,
Yeah.
I think you want to do your basic homework and find out what other projects they've worked on, and et cetera, and make sure they're kind of their sweet spot is what your film is about. But I think, honestly, it comes down to you making a personal decision about whether you feel this is somebody you can work with. I think there are sales agents out there, and you want to do your homework about, who has a good reputation in the industry and who doesn't. There are sales agents out there that really do have all the contacts and all the connections, but they're really not going to be available to you, in terms of kind of be in communication on a regular basis. And so you want to ask questions about, how often would we plan to speak? And I would recommend setting up a structured call time with your sales agent on a monthly basis, or, every 2 weeks, whatever the situation requires. Because I think it's important to stay in contact, because you have information you bring about your film that sometimes can help the sales agent add to the pitches they're making. I think, if your end goal is you have that project that's going to get into Sundance, and that you're expecting to have lots of offers come in, there are a couple really good sales agents that have worked in that way. But I would still get on the phone and have a conversation with them and make sure you're comfortable. It's also an opportunity for me to mention that Rocco is now moving into this sales agent role. We've historically been, a sales agent for the international market, but because of the changes we're all talking about, where global deals are really more and more becoming something that gets put in front of a project early on, we're moving into that space for a small number of projects. I think you always want to ask what the commission is. I'm a little confused about what you meant by an MG, because
Minimum guarantee.
right, most sales agents really work on a commission basis. So if they're coming to you and asking you to put money up front, that's not typically how it works. Generally you sign on a sales agent, they work on a commission basis, and you're not paying them anything up front. The good ones.
Coming back to the issue of funding that I wanted to follow up on earlier, uncomfortable conversations and getting good at it. Uncomfortable conversations and getting good at funding. I've had a number of opportunities where I've had a person that was a sort of a venture capitalist one-on-one, or a potential investor one-on-one, and pitched my idea or pitched my film, told them about why the issue is important and so on, and then they've said, well, how much do you need? and I never know what to say after that point. So, yeah, what? I mean, obviously, well, with 50,000 I could do this, but with 170,000 I could do that.
Nope.
So, I mean, that's not what I said, but I mean, what is the answer to that question?
Okay, so I just want to say, I finished a film. Somebody came to me and said, "What will it cost you to finish the film?" And I said, $200,000. And in that $200,000, there was not a dime for me or my co-producer, because I was so scared that it was like I was so desperate to finish the film. We had not been paid. I was like, so what's the difference whether we've been paid or not? Blah blah. I mean, I'm not sure that it would have made any difference if I'd said $300,000. You know what I mean? And so by icing ourselves out of that, I mean, you have to have an answer, but it has to include you, because it's like, I mean, I have rued that day ever since, because I couldn't go back 2 weeks later and say, you know what, it's really good. But if I had said, the cost of finishing this film is $300,000, my co-producer and I each would have seen $50,000 for this film. And to date, we've seen about 10 cents.
Yeah, I want to underscore that. Like, because I was on a panel a year ago with a few foundations. It was all about sustainability in the field, and something that they were, all the funders on the panel were saying is like, if you don't write in a line to pay yourself, we won't pay you. Right. But if you do, we actually probably will or might, because they also, especially the funders that are in the business of funding film, want to see the sustainability of the space. But there's so much shyness around the money question that people aren't willing to do that, and it's really important. I think we need to advocate, not we, like I think of myself as part of the filmmaking community, but I'm not a filmmaker. But yeah, filmmakers need to be advocating for ourselves.
The correct answer is $300,000.
No,
I'm joking.
Budget, and don't exclude yourself when someone says it. And be prepared. If you're, just to go on one more second, if you are really out there fundraising, and I did it right on the film before, I have to say. Somebody else asked me, what would it cost you to finish this film? And I said, it'll cost $450,000, and I got that money. So, I mean, don't be shy. It's like, it doesn't pay to say $50,000 if it's really going to cost $250 to finish it.
And they want to see it finished.
They want to see it finished. They absolutely do. So it's like, think clearly about what is it really going to cost that includes you getting paid, and that is the answer to the question.
Yeah, and how you answer that question demonstrates how prepared you are to everything. Are you ready to finish your film? You know, are you prepared for the journey that's ahead, and are they going to be investing confidently in that? We often see the biggest mistake young filmmakers make is, I could do this for $22,000, and you're like, you're not insured, you don't have rights cleared, you have no sense of what music will take, you're not working with an editor. There's no chance I believe you're going to do that film. Sometimes you get proven wrong, right? But the odds are such that if they've done their homework, they're going to be much better positioned to succeed.
Yeah, be prepared after you give that answer to email the budget, the itemized budget, in a day or two after you give that answer. So you want to go in with that kind of spelled out.
Yeah. But never go to a fundraising meeting if you don't know your budget.
Just have a quick question. If you have any film festival strategies, I know the 5 that you should get in to get the 75,000. I'm aware of that. I'm just talking about personal, from your experience, advice about how to go about it, like a strategy for
festivals.
Festivals, yeah.
You know, Rocco has historically not worked with festivals. We generally, that's either when we take on a film, either the filmmaker decides they want to keep that piece, or we refer them to other companies. There are a couple other companies that do festival rights. What we do have is a list of our top festivals that we can share. I could share with you if you give me your information. And you know, I think it helps if you have, what we have done for our filmmakers is for select festivals, we'll send a note saying that we're on board to distribute the film, because that information can help. If they know, a festival knows that this film's going to go wider than just my festival, that adds to the strength of your application. I'm trying to think, it's Jeffrey Winter at Film Collaborative who does festivals work, and there's another, trying to think of the other name, but anyway, if you want to email me, I can send that to you.
Thank you.
I just want one more comment about the just in case for filmmakers that aren't used to creating budgets, there are templates online that you can look up. There's, I think, Impact Partners has created one. If you go onto the Doc Society, formerly BritDoc, if you go to their website, they have a whole resource list. And I think in that resource list is also a budget template. And they're just starters, but it gives you a sense of all the different lines and to really think it through realistically.
Hold on, we have one over here. Can we just see a show of hands of first-time filmmakers in the room? Okay, all right.
Just following up on the question about budgets, how do you determine how much to pay yourself? So, like, what is your salary or
broad range?
Don't undervalue yourself. Other filmmakers appreciate it.
Yeah. Yeah. Rates, right?
Yeah, I just when I just made my first budget after I made the film, and I just looked at what would I have to pay someone that I would want to hire to do this. And it's like I have to pay a cinematographer this much a day, and then try to remember how many days I spent.
I mean, literally, it's like breaking down your hours. Like, how much time are you spending on it? You know, like, and then thinking about like how much would I want to be getting paid hourly. You know, you can do it that way. There are all kinds of different ways to think it through, but yeah, absolutely. Maybe starting there.
So yeah, first time filmmaker, and I am where your second story was going, where the film is about the transition from old fossil fuels to solar and energy and everything. And well, there are organizations like environmental organizations lining up to screen in different cities and all of that. Now, I haven't really started talking to them about the money part of it, but I'm thinking it's going to go this way. Mm-hmm. And I'm wondering, just when you mentioned foundations, now I think how much longer do I have to wait for that particular kind of money coming in?
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends.
And so I was looking at,
right.
solar companies or, those kind of companies that might be interested in.
Yeah. So I think that for you to get foundation support behind supporting an organizational campaign, that is a long process. It's going to be 6 months to kind of get that in place. So maybe there's a different strategy for that kind of, maybe you have these organizational support. It depends on what your other distribution piece is. It's hard to comment without knowing kind of what else you've got planned. But if you're already in the place where you have a theatrical distributor on board, and maybe that organizational support can be driven to supporting a theatrical release of the film. Maybe that's where we worked with a film, Peter Rader's film, Awake, the Life of Yogananda. They had a remarkable theatrical release in the US. I think it grossed $1.4 million for a documentary. And they did that because they had relationships with yoga studios. And they got yoga studios to adopt screenings. They had a theatrical booker on board, and then the yoga studios would adopt screenings, and people would go out and show up with their community and watch the film. So, I think
they were all ticketed events.
It was a traditional theatrical distribution, so people would show up and buy box office tickets to the release, to the film. But there was this massive effort put into organizing this campaign to really get people out to the theaters that was really successful.
I mean, just the implicit, just one other thought for her is that, you want to think about some kind of split that seems fair. They wouldn't be holding the screening if you didn't do the film. On the other hand, you wouldn't be having bodies in the theater if they weren't getting them out there for you. So you have to think about, you deserve some portion of the box office, but, but they may be doing a lot of the legwork.
So, first of all, this is great. Thank you very much for doing it. And I guess my question is mostly for Christina, but for others. So your examples, which were really very helpful, are really all about when your film is done or close to.
Right.
So I guess the question is sort of how early is, how soon is soon enough? Because certainly when, in writing proposals and all the grant applications, everybody wants to know what's your distribution plan, what's your impact plan. The reality is if you're in, your past development, you're beginning production, or somewhere in between, impact might be the same in a couple of years, but distribution is certainly going to be completely different.
Right.
And yet, listening to you, especially if you have a film that has international possibilities, which mine does, it seems like, and also the way you've talked about working, that it could be very helpful, having a conversation with you. But just, in general, because things are going to change so much, sort of talking about, if you could talk sort of about a trajectory and any examples about working with people early on, and also for you as well.
Yeah, so we do that in a couple ways. One, we will take on a film just to raise co-production pre-sale money from the international market. So we're doing that with a project called King Bibi about Bibi Netanyahu right now. And what we're doing is just going out to our community of buyers and seeing if they'll come on board as co-producers. So in that case, we made the decision to get involved after we'd seen a treatment and a clip. And we were persuaded on the basis of the story that we thought we could be helpful. And then in this new role that we're taking on as sales agent, we're also doing a little bit, and we're doing this for Laura's film, of executive producing, where we're coming on board and we're saying we really want to get fully behind the project. We're executive producing, meaning raising some money, and then also I should take a moment to talk about how it works for us to get on board as a global sales agent, because there's a sort of an inherent conflict of interest in that we're talking about being a global sales agent when we have an U.S. educational distribution division. And in the case of Laura's film, which clearly that's going to be a big market for her film, the way it works is we will take the film out to the global market and see what kinds of opportunities come out of that. And then we'll have a conversation with Laura about what makes the most sense. And it may be that we get that stellar Netflix Originals deal that means our educational division isn't going to end up with the film. But that's all very transparent. Those conversations are transparent. So that's another example of when we get involved early. But most of the films we end up working with, we have to see a rough cut to really make a decision about whether we think we can get on board as the international distributor. But I would encourage you to touch base and just, we're tracking projects, and it sounds like if there's an international angle to the story, we'd want to know about it. So.
I'm going to answer that question and also have a wrap-up moment, because we're pretty much done, and then I'm going to pass it on to each of you to just what do you want to leave everyone here with? And I guess what I'll leave in this respect is that it's all about relationship building, whether you're building a relationship with a funder or with a partner, and what that goal is. That's what this whole methodology and framework is all about, is really being transparent and open about those conversations. And so I think if you're still making your film, being in conversation with the funders that you think are going to care about it, or if you're hoping to do a campaign with your film and you have a sense of what it can do out there, beginning to cultivate those relationships really early, so that you're aware of what the issues are, how the landscape is shifting. Having that be a live and iterative process will behoove you, and it will, and I think magic starts to happen, relationships form and activities start to solidify, money comes in. So maybe that's what I'll leave you all with in that respect. What do you want to leave everyone with?
Well, I think continuously trying to think through how people will want to become champions of your film, and the way that that spark of excitement that you have to tell the story, but what are the triggers for people to want to join your team and really champion your cause? Because very few successful filmmakers sort of work in a vacuum. The people skills in that convincing it's irreplaceable. Right? So.
Yeah, and I would add, we haven't touched on this entirely, that a vibrant festival strategy, especially for young filmmakers, can be really important for distribution, not just for the distribution of one film, But if you're out and you get to travel with your film out into the world and you're meeting the commissioning editors and you're talking to the community of buyers directly, which we really encourage you do, because as you develop your reputation as filmmakers with them, it makes our job easier. But I think it's really important for career building to be out on the festival circuit and have the opportunity to form some of those relationships. There are some exciting things happening with co-production on U.S. projects out of Europe right now.
And can we clapped for every filmmaker that came up except Laura. Yeah. Can we just give her? Yeah, thanks for hanging in there with us. Do you have any last words? No, I guess not. Okay. All right, thank you all so much for coming. I hope this was useful. Yeah.